We'll call to order the first meeting of 2020 of the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District.
Woohoo!
There you go. There you go.
Give it up for the new chair.
So may we have roll call, please?
Director Hoffman.
Here.
Director Riley.
Here.
Director Adams.
Here.
Director Edwards.
Here.
Director Byrne.
Here.
Director Evans.
Here.
And Director Potter.
Here.
All present.
Thank you. And will you all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance with me? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next order of business is additions and corrections to the agenda. Do we have any?
There are none at this time. Hopefully everyone's aware that item 14 went out incorrectly in the package was subsequently fixed. You all got it in time, it was posted to the website, and I think our distribution list was informed of the change, so there was enough time that it was posted correctly.
And Mr. Chairman, if I could just amplify that?
Yes.
The agenda was always correct, but what went out? The agenda was always correct, but an incorrect staff note went out. And so, because it had to do with a variance, this matter was renoticed, and you have the proper staff report.
Right, thank you. General Manager and Attorney Laredo. Our next item is oral communication, my favorite time. Anyone wish to address the board on consent calendar, information items, closed session items, or matters not listed on the agenda may do so during oral communications. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. The public may comment on all other items at the time they are presented to the board. Oral communication is now open.
All right, the first comment of 2020. Melody Grislock, Public Water Now. Lately, CalAm has been repeatedly saying how disappointed they are that Pure Water Monterey has missed its projected starting date. For CalAm to threaten Pure Water Monterey about being in default is really the height of hypocrisy. No one needs to point out how long we've waited for CalAm to deliver a new water supply. Decades. Their comments are especially troubling in the light of the fact that this water, if this water were available tomorrow, CalAm would not be able to deliver it. CalAm's new $50 million pipeline was designed to deliver this water, but it can't. The pipeline is missing a critical pump station needed for it to supply water to Carmel and Carmel Valley. So in order to use this new 3,500 acre feet of water that they're so disappointed is delayed, in order to replace the water from the Carmel River, I'm going to start that over. So in order to use this new 3,500 acre feet of water to replace the water from the Carmel River and satisfy the state-ordered cutback, a pump station must be added at the Forest Lake tanks to increase the pressure in order to deliver this water to Carmel and the Valley. CalAm is just now asking the PUC for permission to build this pump station. When will CalAm be able to meet their obligation to deliver this water? Our community has waited for decades for a new water supply. Now we have it almost ready, and CalAm is not prepared to deliver it. That is seriously disappointing. Thank you.
Thank you. Oral communication is still open.
Good evening, Michael Bear, San Jose, California. Glad I made it on time. So I wasn't here in December. I planned to come, but I was sick. So, but you guys got some good business done without me. I understand you're going on to the next phase. I want to thank Molly for your year of service. I want to thank Alvin for your upcoming year of service. Gene, are you the vice chair? Yes. So I want to thank you for your year of service. I'm going to say something you might not believe, but I think. Cal-Am is not all bad. One of the things they do is charitable giving in the community. And one of the charities they give to is the Village Project in Seaside. I've known Fred and Angelus since 1991. Do you believe that's almost 30 years ago? It's amazing how time flies. Anyway, they are dear to my heart. We worked on NCBI stuff together back in the 90s. And Cal-Am pays $100,000, and my understanding is about $100,000 a year program to train men from being disadvantaged men, mostly black men, or men of color, to work to get skilled as water service providers, to drive the trucks, I think, or to service, to provide service. Village Project supports Cal-Am because of that program. And so going forward, I just think I would hope you could look to mitigate some of the impact that something like the Village Project, maybe Boys and Girls Club. I mean, I know they give other charitable givings, and some of it may be like Scramp or something doesn't need your support necessarily, but some of the good giving they do, I think it would be important either during negotiation for the takeover or certainly by the time you get to court to have a plan or to reach out to these people to mitigate and as much as possible, as feasible, to continue supporting the Village Project when you become the purveyor and other programs like that. Thank you for your time.
Oral communication still open. I should have closed it. That's my good. That's one of my citizens. Thank you, sir.
Peter Kaiser, Seaside. I've been observing this water situation for years. I came to Peninsula about 1970 from Vietnam. And I've made suggestions over the years that I thought would even eliminate the need for a desal plant, one of the most expensive ways to get water, and Saudi Arabia does it with our billions of oil money. So I'm going to remind suggestions that should have been done 40 years ago when this district started. So we have a dam up there. My understanding is it's maybe 2/3 non-functional with mud. And there's a commission, you have a group that's studying it right now. And you've had 40 years to work on that. We want you to get the mud out and sell it. Apparently it's valuable soil. Sell it, make some profit on it. Let's have the dam back. If we have that back and we want to have the San Clemente back, fix it up, it's gone, and then maybe we won't need desal. We also been recommending storage ponds at the former Fort Ord. Once they take the munitions out, store the water, the rainwater in there, and have it go down into the water table instead of out the streams into the ocean. And also I've been suggesting next that let's keep each of the water treatment plants that we had in all of our cities before you moved them and closed them, and return the gray water to each house. About less than 10% of our water is used for drinking and potable uses. The rest is landscaping and agriculture. So if you returned our water to us, treated as landscaping water, like purple pipes and gray water, then we wouldn't need the desal plant. And then, like at our house, we have two 270-gallon tanks, storage tanks, and only on one side of the roof, we have gutters, and we have the water go down there, and maybe a couple of rainstorms, they're full. Almost 500 gallons of water to help water our garden, but that's not enough. My daughter likes a real lawn. I like what's called a drought lawn. It's only green when it rains. She wants a real lawn, so we're paying a lot of money for that. So we'd like the Los Padres Dam emptied of the mud and restored quickly, but we don't need the desal plant. Let's have the gray water. Let's have the water storage, and let's do these things quickly. Since 1978, you've had some time to deal with this, but I understand it's under study, the Los Padres Dam. And maybe Cal-Am has been remiss on these things, but I've been talking to their board meeting in Chautauqua Hall and talking to them for years too. So if you're going to take over them, let's get these things done before We spent all this money on this billion-dollar desal and so forth. And congratulations, Edward. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Right on time. Board communication still open?
Chair Edwards?
Yes.
I just want to mention that Margaret Kepernall contacted me today. She submitted a statement that's in your packet, and there were copies of her statement on the counter.
Thank you, Arlene. Board communication still open.
Kevin Dayton, representing the Monterey Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. I was at the Monterey City Council meeting on Tuesday night, and you'll be getting a request from the city asking about the possibility of water allocations for affordable housing. The city council went forward with a proposal to issue RFPs for 4 city sites that could be used for affordable housing, and water is a concern there. I was there to support it. In fact, there was nobody there to oppose it, which was good. And I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for this, but obviously water is an issue, and for those who decide that they don't want downtown affordable housing to be built, it'd be great for them not to have water as an argument to use against them. So when this comes before you, please do what you can. I know you've had presentations before about what to do about water, but don't let water be the excuse for not building housing for people. That's for regular people here that's affordable to them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Board communication still open? Going once, going twice. Close. Next item is a presentation to our former board chair, Molly Evans. And before I tell Molly to come up and stand up, Director Evans to come up and stand up, I want to talk about a few of her accomplishments. While chair, she served on the administration committee, the public outreach, the water demand, and the legislation advocacy committee. She made decisions with open mind and analytical. Thank you. Analytical. Actively represented the district in the community, making presentation to the community and business groups. Seeing the need to clarify information for the public, asked staff to prepare a report on supply and demand for water on the Monterey Peninsula. Thank you, Molly. Provided support and guidance for completion of the Pure Water Monterey project. She started the board on the expansion of that in her first few months, and I was glad she did. She also looking for water for affordable housing. She came up with things of that sort. We will continue on to that. As Molly as chair and as a vice chair, you heard that old saying from the former presidents, only one president served at a time. Well, Molly taught me that. Only one chair of the Monterey Peninsula at one time. She really took over when she needed to. She gave me room to expand, but when it was time for her to step in, she really let me know it's time for me to step in. And I appreciate that. So Molly, will you please come up and get your gavel? You're welcome. And you may have the mic.
I think I'd get the mic tonight. Keep it brief, since I know you've heard enough of me from the last year. Thanks. This means a lot. I love serving on this board. I really enjoyed leading it last year. I have a wonderful board to work with. While we don't always agree and see eye to eye, we are able to discuss all our differences and make sure that everybody feels heard. And that, to me, is the most important part about being in this organization. So thank you, and Chair Edwards, I look forward to seeing what you do with the board this year.
Thank you, Molly. Director Evans. Any other director, vice chair?
Well, I just want to commend Molly. She ran a great meeting. She had the right amount of humor and definitely controlled the meetings, and I just think she did a wonderful job.
Any other board members? Go ahead, there.
I thank you very much as well, Molly. It was a pleasure when I first met you, when you were running for the chair, the seat that you have, and it was just really enjoyable. You've never let me down. I'm very proud of the way that you not just maintain the board meetings themselves, but simply the way that you maintain yourself. And I don't know that we will ever have another chair who will be able to do a half Ironman. So thank you for carrying that water for us, so to speak.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Director.
I'd just like to add that, some people are just basically good people, down deep, and Molly's one of those, and I appreciate knowing you.
Director Hoffman?
Yes, I just want to say that I really appreciated Molly's enthusiasm, energy, and intelligence that she brought to the board last year as chair, and it was very helpful to me being around you, Molly, in the last year, so thank you.
Well, in the spirit of redundancy, I feel I need to say something here. So, Molly, you and I served together for years before. It's a pleasure sitting at your side again. We've done well in the past. I know we'll do well in the future. So, my pleasure to have you sitting next to me again. Thank you.
Thank you. Please don't kick me under the table again.
I fell away.
Thank you, board members.
First year sitting next to him getting kicked under the table.
George.
Thank you, board members. Now, our next item on the agenda is consent calendar. Anyone wish to pull anything from the consent calendar?
Chair, I'd like to pull number 2.
Number 2.
Chair, I'd like to pull number 3.
2, 3. Anybody else? 2 and 3. Anyone from the public would like to pull something from the consent calendar? Okay, no one from the public. We need a first and a second for the balance of the consent calendar, please.
Second?
First by Director Potter, second by Director Supervisor. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. Item number 2, sorry, Mary. Item number 2.
Well, I pulled that, and I just wanted to have the board consider, in the past 8 years that I've been on the board, the chair has always contacted each director to see what their interest or their expertise was in terms of what committees they were interested in. And I think that benefited the whole board because the directors that had an interest or had expertise in the committees they wanted to be on benefited the board by their expertise. And I just would like the assignments maybe to be reconsidered in terms of having the opportunity for each board member to express which committee they would prefer to be on.
Okay. Any other comments on item 2?
Chair?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I was somewhat surprised that, because last year Molly reached out, I know to me, and asked, I turned it off. Oh, there it goes. Thanks, Dave. Molly reached out to me to ask what my interests were, as well as made recommendations on how I could become more well-rounded in what she thought would be a good idea for me to serve on, and I really appreciated that. And so, I was surprised this year that that opportunity was not provided. And I agree with Director Byrne that I think it would be valuable for input from the board members to be considered in the appointments to the different committees based on interest and also expertise. Thank you.
Any other comments?
So I would concur with Director Burns' comments. I'm suddenly vaulting into a leadership role on the Ledge Committee, and yet Mary Adams, who's been on that, is now an alternate, and I don't know if I would want to do that without having heard Mary's input on it. I was on the Ledge Committee for a long time when I was on the board before, and I'd be glad to do that, but I don't want to step on anybody's toes, and I was not consulted. I don't know if Mary was consulted on this either. So just out of due respect, I don't want to step on anybody's toes by going back to the position I had before.
I'm happy with the committees that I've been assigned to, so I'm good.
Okay. Well, good. Then I'm happy with the assignment. But I do think, it would have been nice if there'd been an opportunity for people to opine. I was asked, though, did I want to serve on the admin committee or anything like that, and I said absolutely not. So I was consulted by somebody, I can't remember who it was, but, yeah.
Okay, any other comments before I get started? Not to the public yet. Let me finish this one. I looked at the committee. Arlene, do you have the committee?
I'll bring that up.
Please do. Oh, no, it's another one. It's this one. You know, when I sat down, I asked Arlene to do something for me. And it was to run back the last 4 years of committees on who sat on what committee. Yes, I know that Molly talked to everybody last year. I didn't think as a chair I had to talk to everybody. I spent about 13 years on this board before in committee assignments from 97 to 2010. They gave out committee assignments and nobody never complained about them. They took their assignments. I moved around several times, but I didn't complain about it. We took our assignments as we thought that we should. Now, I know some people have sat on these committees for 3 and 4 years. You can see that on the board. And I decided when I became chair to move people around and change things, let other people get that feeling of how to sit on the water demand committee, or they sit on the administration committee, public outreach, the Ledge committee. I made that decision to change them. And I decided, hey, I'm gonna stick with it. I'm gonna stick with it unless the board wanna change it. Yeah, I'm sorry that you're not on there for another year, but you take a break from it, and vice chair will be chair next year. She can put herself back on it. But that's why I did it. So other people can have other experience in doing things. Yes, it was a hard decision. It was a hard decision. The general manager even talked to me about them. I said, no, I'm gonna stick with this. I'm gonna stick with this. Now, unless this board wanna change or people wanna swap what committees, they can. I'm not gonna deny that. But director, chair, which gonna stick with this right now, unless I'm outvoted. Mr. Laredo, do I have anything to stand on, or I'm gonna talk to my attorney?
Legal counsel.
The meeting rules say that the chair proposes the assignments. The assignments need to be ratified or may be changed by the vote of the board. So this matter is before you for action.
Thank you.
So in the.
Go ahead,
No,
Mr.
go
Director
ahead.
Potter.
I was just going to say, in the interest of time, I'd make a motion, and if there's an amending motion, that could be the forum to go ahead and make changes to the assignments as they're noted. So I'd go ahead and move the assignments as they're in the agenda here. And then if there's a second, we could have some discussion around the second. If there was amendments to that motion, we could do that to change any assignments.
Second.
People were so inclined. Thank you, George.
We have a motion by Director Potter, second by Director Rowley. Discussion.
Well, again, I have to reiterate that I think the district and the board suffers for not having the expertise of various people, and each of us represent something different in terms of what we bring to the table. So I can't support the motion.
Director Rowley.
Without knowing the history, because I was new a year ago, I assume I was asked because I was brand new. And nobody knew where I stood on committee assignments and the different subject matters and the structure. And I'm going to say that without knowing, but I assume Gary was new a year ago. Dave, you were new again a year ago, cycling through. So I just kind of assumed that we were asked because we were coming back into an organization or starting new in an organization, and that was where the preference. I didn't take it as a pattern that every chair was going to check with everybody. I just assumed it was because I was new. But that's just my opinion.
Okay, Mayor,
You have a hard time with my name, I can see that. So I just assumed that it was like it is at the Board of Supervisors, that the chair has the prerogative to place on the committee's people as he sees fit, he or she sees fit. And it's just, what you do. So I didn't question it at all. It seems fine to me.
thank you. Director Evans, any comments? I'm not pushing you.
No, so yes, last year there were a lot of new people, and I wanted to place people where I thought that they could learn a lot more about how the board functioned, and where I felt that they had something to offer, or their expertise would back them, or where I felt that they could be where they could learn a lot more. But that's how I handled it. That's how Chair Evans did. Chair Edwards has another viewpoint, moving people around where they can serve in a different capacity. Neither is right, neither is wrong. It's just a difference in the chair. If I were to redo the schedule, I might put myself somewhere else. But if Chair Edwards needs me on a certain committee, I'm happy to take that position.
Thank you. And my comments before we call for the questions.
Do you have public comment on this?
Yes. Anything that a committee do comes to the full board. So anything a committee do comes to the full board. So if you're not on the committee and you got the expertise during the full board meeting, you can bring that out. If the committee missed something, you could bring that out. It might have to go back through the committee, but you have a box to stand on at the full board meeting like tonight. So I want to take it out to the public for public comment.
Dan Turner, Monterey. I didn't mean I wouldn't speak at all. I just meant I didn't have any opening. I am the poster child, I think, for nattering nabobs of negativism. I thought things were pretty bad here on this board. But it turns out things are worse than I thought. Even something like this. Committee assignments, splits between the people who are or tend to be supporters of Cal-Am and against the movement toward public water, and people who are in favor of moving toward public water. Even committee assignments. Incredible. It's worse than I thought.
Public comment is still open. Public comment is now closed on item 2.
Call the question.
Call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
No.
Okay, 4-2.
That
Four-
doesn't add to seven.
Five.
Excuse me. Didn't count myself, so you gotta help me.
And Mr. Chair, I
Go
believe
ahead.
those are Mr. Hoffman and Ms. Byrne voting no.
Out
Okay,
of 7.
so 5-2.
Exactly.
Thank you.
The new math.
You gonna make that? All right, item 3.
So item 3 is the consideration of adoption of Resolution 2020-01, amending Rule 25.5, Table 4, the high-efficiency appliance credits to allow a credit for rainwater and gray water systems in all residential applications. And this item amends the credit to any residential application. Right now, it is restricted only to multifamily residential applications. The credit reduces the fixture unit value for clothes washers and toilets by 3/4 to account for the use of rainwater or gray water. This item is supported by staff in our calculations. The calculations assure that there's more than sufficient water that's being stored in these systems to meet the estimated demand. And the technology is supported by both district staff and the county health department. So this item is to expand it to single-family residential and residential as well as multifamily. I would like to point out this evening that by adopting this item tonight, item number 13, which is consideration of a variance for a mixed-use project that is proposing to use rainwater to flush toilets and wash clothes, it would not require further action. So there would be no public hearing on item 13 if the board adopts this item this evening. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
Chair.
Director Evans.
Yes, I think this went through water demand.
Yes, it did.
I know that the recommendation was not available at the time of the board packet was put together, and I did miss that meeting, and I apologize. But I just was asking, I have one question, and it is on clarification. In the end of the staff note, there are 3 bullets on requirements to grant the credit.
Mm-hmm.
The first bullet point is the rainwater graywater system capacity shall meet 100% of projected annual demand plus 3 days. So I wanted to understand that if the calculation comes out, for example, that 10,000 gallons are needed for that residence for a year to flush toilets, shower, laundry, whatever, does that mean that site has to have a 10,000 gallon storage tank? Because it says the system capacity shall meet 100% of projected annual demand. So I'm trying to understand, does that mean that the storage capacity?
Not necessarily, because when we're talking about rainwater catchment occurs during the 4 months of the year that we have
Right.
rainwater.
Yes.
So during those 4 months, while there's the continual flow through the system, that storage capacity would not have to be 100%. However, we are looking at what that storage capacity is in dry year. So not in a normal year or a below normal year, but rather a dry year. And they do have the reduction on the factor is by 75%, so that if they needed to augment their rainwater or gray water system for whatever reason with potable, that would be available to them as well. And calculations, I can ask Stephanie Kister. Do you want to respond to that any further? Or? I think you covered it. Okay. So.
Okay. It wasn't, the way that I read it, it sounded like they had to have 100% of the demand
100%
available 100% of the time.
No,
so
no,
that's why I was trying to get some
not
clarification on
that.
that bullet point, because that
Right.
could be a very onerous
That
obligation.
would be a huge condition.
And
Yes.
that's why I wanted to
Okay,
ask.
thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Question, Director Hoffman.
Yeah, a couple of them. Dovetailing on Director Evans, as a practical matter, how would we determine what is adequate storage that a particular unit would need if they want to install one of these systems?
And I believe that information is in the staff note for the variance this evening, but Stephanie, do you want to respond to that question?
She might as well come on up.
It's the Stephanie team.
Okay, so putting this on the credit table, it would follow the water credit values that we have assigned for each water fixture, which are estimates. So using that table, there could be difference in a property, how many folks live there, while they still have the same number of bathrooms, right? So on this credit table, it's going to fall under the credit capacity based on that fixture amount. So we would more than likely equal it to gallons, and converting it to acre feet and into gallons, and coming up with a reasonable number there. And then more than likely having an additional buffer on top of that to account for any, homes with higher numbers of folks that live in them and things of that nature.
And then, as part of the calculations that were done, for instance, for the variance that you'll hear later this evening, if you're so inclined to hear it. It was looked at two ways, both the fixture unit value, which is based on kind of an average use per fixture, which right now we have two different ones for toilets. It's either 0.8 or 1.4. 1.3, thank you. Or she also looked at the calculations based on what an average home of 2.3 people uses to flush a toilet or to do laundry, and use that as a basis to look at both different directions and to determine whether or not the storage would be sufficient. So we're not looking for exactly 100% of this number, and in the case of the variance later, it would be 100. Their actual storage is 140% of what their annual needs would be. So generally speaking, you're looking at a higher amount of storage than you'd actually need. And again, we're not giving them 100% credit for anything. They are getting a small amount of potable use assigned to those fixtures, so that in the event the system fails for a period of time, or in the event that there's not adequate storage for some unknown reason, say nobody's living in the house for a certain period of time, they come back and they don't have any water in the tank, then they would be able to augment slightly with potable.
If I could.
Go ahead, Director.
So, under one of the bullets, it talks about metering the water that's being, because there's got to be a potable backup that's, and I'm not talking about the particular case that we're going to potentially hear later. This is just as a general, how this would apply. I don't see anywhere here where, other than metering and reporting to us, that there's any, for lack of a better word, enforcement of if the system, we got a drought and there's no rain for a whole year and they have to use potable water. What mechanism is I don't see a mechanism here as to prevent them or to do anything when it relates to basically using potable water when there was supposed to be rainwater instead.
Yeah, and you're correct. The assumption is that 100% of the water used for those fixtures will come from the alternative water source. But because we are charging them with that quarter of a fixture unit value for each one of these things, that assumes that at some point in time they will need to use potable water. So enforcement, the enforcement is that there's a deed restriction on the property requiring that they use and maintain this system, that they report to us annually, and the reporting includes information about the amount of, which is why all the metering is required, and Water Demand went through a great deal of discussion on this, to measure the amount of the gray water or rainwater that's being used by the system, as well as any potable water, so that if we find over time that these systems are not as reliable, then we can adjust how much credit we're giving for the systems. So because right now we believe that 100% is achievable, but we're also putting this little buffer in there, we would come back at a certain period in time if we found that they were not actually achieving the savings that we expected.
Well, with that being said, if you don't mind me continuing.
Go ahead.
Chair.
One more and let somebody else go.
Okay. With that being said, it's closing the door after the horse is out of the barn. I mean, once you approve a project and number of fixtures, and if you're not achieving what you anticipated in using the rainwater system, and you're using potable, then it ends up being potable, then it's potable water, and so you're actually using potable when you were planning on and made your decision making on not using potable.
And that would be true, and I should say that in any case when we issue a water permit, it's based on a fixture unit value. That fixture unit value may or may not actually reflect what the long-term average use of water is. It's an estimate, and some people use more water and some people use less water. So the fact that if we issue a permit to a gray water or rainwater system that ultimately may need more back augmentation from the potable system, We're getting the information through the reporting, and we can adjust that credit. But ultimately, that amount of water is going to be so very small, at least through our first, until we have enough information about these systems to know whether to adjust that credit. It would have such a minimal effect on anything, and particularly based on the fact that these fixture unit values estimate water use, and they're not exact water use for that project.
Vice Chair.
So actually, I think part of what makes the whole system work is the potable water that's used becomes part of the gray water system.
And that's
so
true, too.
the more potable water you use, the more gray water you have available.
And like I said,
So
Monterey
it's-
County Health Department is very much in favor of these kinds of systems. They want to see this and expect to see more of these systems being put into place. Anything we can do to facilitate that use and to actually gather the information really is to our benefit, and ultimately will help with water savings. Did you want to add anything?
I would just add that, when staff would be reviewing one of these to see if the system design met, 100% of the projected demand, we'd be looking at either a low water year or maybe even a dry water year to calculate rainfall. And then the time period that the tank size needs to meet is, we were looking at 8 months, which is longer than the typical dry period. So it is taking into account, a lower water year and a period where you may not have a full tank in May, maybe it stops raining in February, to take into account some of those odd water years.
Any other questions? I have one. Are there kits out there to do this?
Yes, there are.
Okay, the reason I asked, I would like the public to see a picture.
Well, and I would say it depends on the scale.
Yeah,
So
well,
in the case of these types of projects where we're looking at completely augmenting a demand for a water fixture, it literally will require dual plumbing within the system, backflow protection, which is why we have all the metering requirements as well. And so those types of projects are larger scale projects. We can put some information on our website, and I'd be happy to do that, because these are becoming more and more common.
okay, yeah, because the ADUs, can this fit onto like an ADU?
Yeah.
City of Seaside, thinking about building a couple of ADUs. I'd like to get this technology, if they want to do it, in that.
Yeah, we'll
So-
be happy to provide that information on the website.
Okay, and this for any residential?
Yeah, it comes down to the math, though. You have to have enough square footage to capture enough rain to meet that 8-month demand in your tank. So it's a combination of catchment, meaning the roof line,
Or
square
gray water
footage.
also.
Or gray water, right, if you're doing gray water. So if the math works for an ADU or for a full single-family home, then yeah.
Okay, I'm glad, Director Rowley.
A question, and maybe, Mr. Stoll, you've given me part of the answer that I'm, it was available for multifamily units prior, and it's based on the same amount of rain projections and use projections and fixture counts and so on. What caused the change to include residential? Is it demand? Is it request? Is it technology? Is it economics? Maybe it's the roof capacity.
Yeah, excellent question. So when we first approved the credit last summer, so it's not that long that we've had this on the books, we felt that limiting it to multifamily housing would make it easier for us to permit. But what we found is at this point, we've got a mixed-use project that is proposing it. There's no reason that that project should not have a credit. We're confident in our numbers. We're confident that we have equipment that's reliable and will provide what we need for this type of a system. And so really, there's no reason that it shouldn't be available to any residential use. We already allow this type of a credit in a non-residential use. So why shouldn't we allow it in a residential use?
So it's an emerging use of technology or resource because of the technology maybe, and roof capacity. Okay, thank you.
Okay, one more board question. Go ahead, Director Hoffman.
Yeah, so is there, I don't see a requirement that if we allow, under this situation, a rainwater, gray water system, that the applicant is therefore required to have ultra-low flow toilets, for example, or required to have high-efficiency washers and dryers. So how are the requirements for those sorts of appliances and fixtures integrated into the approval process for this kind of, I don't see it here.
Yeah, it is part of our conservation regulation. So our water efficiency standards require high-efficiency clothes washers, dishwashers, toilets, when they get a water permit.
But,
there's-
but say going to like a .8 toilet instead of the 1.28 is not required. So when they figure out the capacity, they'd just be looking
We're
at
counting it on a 1.28, yeah, but they are required to go to the lower flow fixtures.
But I think he makes a good point that if you're going to allow the credit, maybe they should also go to the ultra-low flow, like the .8, and the washing machine that's 1 unit
Well,
instead of 1.5.
The washing machine is a high-efficiency clothes washer, so that's the credit that's on
1
table
unit.
4.
Or the 1.5.
The toilet is the 1.28 gallon toilet or a .8 gallon toilet, so they have an option.
Right. Now they have an option, but I think what Director Hoffman is saying, they should, if they're going to get these credits, they should probably be required to go to the lowest fixture units.
But
Mr. Chair, if I could just point out, this is a resolution that modifies a table. This is not the rules and regulations.
Okay.
This is, if you wish to go into that mode, that has to be done by ordinance. That's not before you tonight.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? Because I'm going to send it to the public. Public comment is open on this item.
Is this mostly designed for new builds, or is it also for existing?
It can go either way.
one.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have quite a bit of experience with this. When I first read this, I thought it was, so we got low-flow washer, we got the low-flow dishwasher, we got the low-flow toilet, and we got money back from MP, we got the money back, right? We turned in our receipts and we got money back. Then I also remodeled a half bath into a full bath, added a shower, and I understood how you had to, okay, we're gonna get rid of the laundry sink next to the washer in order to put the shower in. So I understand, I filled out those schedules too. And, Gary's point, I think, is well taken. What I'm thinking is, okay, you figure out you need 10,000 gallons. So you gotta have the capacity for 10,000 gallons. If it doesn't rain an inch, you have 0 gallons, right? I mean, it's an unreliable source. So it seems to me where you need to dedicate the requirement is in storage capacity. Now, when you're going to give credits for okay, you can add a shower, or with these credits you get an extra bathroom. Then we got to have meters. That all makes it complicated. It sounds complicated. So what I thought was happening when I first read this is, so I have a water farm. When I moved to Santa Clara, I'm catching rain. I got my storage system last year, and I caught 6,000 gallons of rain. I had 10,000 gallons of capacity. I got my 2,600 gallon cisterns, $1,100 delivered, $4,400. What can MPWD do to help me pay for that? If you put the money there, building the infrastructure, and for new houses, requiring, if you're gonna do this, you require the amount of capacity that's required to be built. And then if it gets to a drought, we're all conserving like crazy, right? I mean, look at what was happening before. We were using potable water to wash our clothes. So the more rain we can catch from the sky, the better it is for the community. But you got it in a complicated way. And you could just help people build their systems and give them money back. Thank you.
Thank you. Public comment still open?
Kevin Dayton, speaking as a private citizen and customer of the water system. This particular board is continually obsessed with who should be controlling the water supply, whether the corporation should be controlling it or the government should be controlling it. And my personal view, and the same thing applies to the Monterey Bay Community Power and the Power, there should be a long-term vision for our grandchildren to free ourselves from public utilities. And I know that gets a lot of people agitated because a lot of people make money off of the system. But when you rely on a big public system, first, you're vulnerable in several ways. If you have an earthquake or some sort of natural disaster or an attack from a enemy, foreign or domestic, it can cause great problems. Also, I believe that some people, look at the water system and the electric system and say, we can trap people and make a lot of money off of it, or we can control their behavior. The long-term plan, rather than infrastructure, in my feeling, is getting people to the point where they're mostly self-sufficient from having to rely on these big public agencies to provide the things that they need. And you should be spending, I think, a lot more time looking at stuff like this and saying, what can we do to help people collect their own water, reuse their own water, so that the point is that they're no longer needing to turn to some sort of agency or corporation to supply this sort of thing. And the technology is continuing to advance. Back in 2014, you passed some sort of thing where you would allow a collection of water from air, and I don't think anything's happened about that since then. But there's all sorts of things that are going on in other places in the world, and I actually believe it's feasible in 50 years. You may have a point where people can be self-sufficient for a lot of their activities in life. And this is a kind of vision that really needs to be looked at in the long term. And I know it gets a lot of people angry. Somebody might say, who's going to pay for those pensions if we eventually, get rid of the public agencies? But I think in the long run, this is the way to go for civilization. And I hope that you look at this kind of thing more seriously and perhaps spend more time saying, what can we do to make people self-sufficient on their water so they aren't going to have to continually rely on this big system to take care of their needs. So that's my thinking about the future of water in terms of long-term, multi-generational visions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Hi, Susan Schiavone, Seaside. Just have some thoughts on what we're talking about. And I know in Bermuda, they have to catch all their rain on the roof. So they have lime roofs, and the rain comes down and they catch it and they drink it, and that's what they use. But if they don't get the water, they're shipping in bottled water by the, cartloads. So we can't really just rely on the rain coming on our roofs and individual houses collecting water just because of the amount. We still need the water district to do aquifer storage and collect water and provide extra water. It's a community effort, and I look at it as a community activity. So, but I do think it's important to encourage these kinds of systems in homes, and I would like to also add that from what I'm hearing, it's expensive. It's going to cost a lot of money for people to add these things. And for people who are lower middle income or below, they don't have a chance to do that. We have buckets around our house. We have lots of rainwater catchment cisterns and things like that. But to afford replumbing and adding a complete system like that, I can't even imagine what it would cost. So I hope that as you're considering this, you also consider helping people that are lower income. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephan, any more comments? Come on up, sir.
I certainly didn't expect to speak at this, but we have to rethink everything we're doing because it's totally it's very wrong. If you've ever met anybody from the Midwest who's drank cistern water their whole life, you're likely to have meet somebody without their teeth. For one, that's a well-known fact. But if you collect water and use it at the house, which I think is a good idea in many respects, it's going to be a plumber's field day, for one. But if you need a certain amount of water to transmit waste to a disposal site, And you need to have an adequate supply available at all times to deliver the waste products that we put in our systems. And the problem is not water, but maybe quality water as well. So you have to look at that. What's the quality of the water that we're consuming? And every house, in the house yard, and whatever that uses the gray water, unless we change drastically everything we wear and we cook on, we're going to have a toxic waste diet at every single house. And when you deprive an ecosystem of water that comes down naturally and drains naturally, you've deprived water from every other living organism other than ourselves. So anyway, we need to do some serious thought about this whole thing. And back to the dams, we need a dam in this community, a better dam or an improved dam or whatever, because water storage is the most important thing for our long-term benefit in the use of water. So anyway, so.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Could I have your name?
Mark Eccles from Pacific Grove. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Stephanie, do we have one more?
Sorry,
That's,
I'm not very quick to stand up.
that's all right. Take your time. Take your time.
My name is Matthew Keidler. I'm a licensed civil engineer. I'm also the applicant of the variance for item number 13.
That's why I want to bring you up.
So I have done a lot of research for a presentation that I'm really hoping I'm not going to give tonight. But that research answers Director Hoffman and Director Edwards a lot of your questions that you had. So I wanted to bring that up now in general, not specifically to my project. One is that the annual water usage, what I did was I used just the credit allotment over the last, for like a prescriptive credit allotment and assigned it to the gallons per credit. And then compared that to water usage over the last 20 years of recorded rainfall from the NOAA rain sensors at the airport. And then just did a calculation to convert the inches of rainfall to the square footage of roof capture. And you can plot this out and prove that, you know, a certain number of days you are deficient on your water. Another certain amount of days you have excess water, and you can plot your averages. I can share all of the data and the process that I went through with all of you to see that. The city of San Francisco put together a very complete rainwater harvesting manual for single-family residential, so that document has been well developed. It's 75 pages long. And then Chapter 15 and Chapter 16 of the California Plumbing Code are also very clear with different screening techniques to make sure that you don't have any mosquitoes in there or other pathogens like E. coli transferred into the toilet water. All of this is for non-potable water. None of this is for potable. The plumbing code is very clear that it's for non-potable water, not for anything that, even it would, by the plumbing code, it would be not permitted for even showering. It was only permitted for flushing toilets and for washing clothes. Those are the only two allowances for rainwater capture in the California Plumbing Code. Through our project, as I've been ramping up to this and discussing this with Water District staff, I've also been reaching out to the code officials in the county and networking with them to educate the different code officials for each of the municipalities, the county and each of the cities. And we're looking at organizing lunch and learns and seminars so all the code officials can be brought up to speed on how to properly approve those. So I have a meeting scheduled with the City of Monterey, but then we're going to expand that to the other areas. So like I said, I just wanted to generally talk about it, not talk about the specifics of my project, because hopefully that'll be a moot point.
Thank you, sir. Any other public comment?
Kaiser Seaside. And I would recommend that whatever your rules are, that these rules are quite simple, and that the average homeowner with average home skills in home repair could be able to set this up into their home if they want to build it themselves. And that there would be reasonably priced materials, that they don't have to buy expensive connections and expensive meters. And this could all be done for maybe a few $100s if you do the work yourself. And the materials are reasonable because your standards are reasonable. They don't have to have like a $400 meter on several things in the system. Or they don't have to have a $400 filter in 3 places. So make it inexpensive, easy for homeowners to install themselves. I've been on some of those solar tours, and I went to see one house in Carmel Valley. And I said, well, how much did your system cost? It was $40,000. Well, when are you going to pay it off? And I said, with your savings on your electricity. So well, that doesn't matter to me. Well, that's not the system we're looking for. We want it to be maybe a few hundreds of dollars that each person installs and so forth. And then also, just a short suggestion I forgot to mention earlier, that if we're going to consider purchasing a water system or CalAm, we don't want you to use eminent domain. We want a willing buyer and a willing seller, please, and no forcing their arm. This is capitalist system in America. So no use of eminent domain, please, to force them to sell. We want a willing buyer and a willing seller.
All right, thank you, sir. Any other public comment? Public comment on this item is now closed.
Chair, I move approval of staff recommendation.
Second?
We have first by Director Evans and second by the Vice Chair. Any discussion? Go ahead, General Manager.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that, the speaker did mention the airport's rain gauge. We're going to end up looking at this a little bit differently. We've got almost a 100-year record at San Clemente. It's about, think of it, about 21 inches a year on average. And here at the district, it's about 16, 17-year record. It's about 15.56 inches per year. And at Naval Postgraduate School, with a longer record than here, but shorter record than San Clemente, it's about 20 inches a year. So we're probably going to come up with different math based on where you're located, using San Clemente for Mid-Valley and Carmel Valley Village, using 93% of that for the coastal communities, and then if you're in Pasadena, Monterey, Hidden Hills, it'll probably be even lower because of the distance. We have thought this through a little bit about how we're going to implement the math, and it's not just one size fits all.
Okay, good. Any other questions? Anything on the motion? Just one quick thing on the motion. Stephanie, I hope we try to keep in contact with that young man, please, because it looked like he got a lot of knowledge and he could help us.
I'll actually distribute his paperwork to the board later.
And keep it on file for the public if they want to. And thank you for coming out.
Director Edwards, anybody that calls me a young man, I just appreciate it.
Well, thank you, sir. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, 7-0. Thank you.
And the applicant is free to go because we will not be hearing item 13.
We can let him loose. I like to keep him, but we can let him loose. Next item on the agenda is General Manager report.
Thank you. I'm going to try to be brief. We've got a lot of things on the calendar today. First, an informational item. There's a new general rate case for setting California American rates for 2021, 22, and 23. There is an open house sponsored by the company Thursday, February 6th from 5 to 7 at California American offices in Pacific Grove. There are also 2 public participation hearings sponsored by the Public Utilities Commission on this. One at Seaside City Hall on February 18th at 6 p.m. and one at Gonzales City Hall for some of the satellite systems primarily on February 19th at 6 p.m.
So I didn't hear, it's the 18th in Seaside?
18th at Seaside City Hall, 6 p.m. 6 o'clock. Then moving on to the General Manager's report, item 9. It's on the screen. A couple of things to point out. We are, pardon me. So we are currently 164 acre-feet over the quarterly budget forecast, October, November, December. We also have exceeded last year by 346 acre-feet. But keep in mind, to date, this year, we've already got 332 acre-feet of aquifer storage and recovery and Table 13 water rights through the end of December, which did not occur until January a year ago. So trying to compare, different rainfall and ASR conditions is challenging. On the projects, there you can see the Table 13 actual exceeding target. That's because of those heavy rains that we received. Sand City is at 0, and recall in the past we've talked about difficulties with both the source wells and then the discharge permit. That's not what's going on here. What's going on here is some retrofit of membranes, and they don't have redundancy. And so the system was shut down for the period in question here, but it's back up and running. On production for customer service, again, the proxy for demand, we're 41 acre-feet over last year. And recall, we had no rain whatsoever in October, so the irrigation season lasted a little bit longer than expected. With respect to compliance with the CDO for water year 2019, milestone 4 was met because the requirement was any component of the desal project be built, and they commenced on September 16th with approximately 2,500 linear feet of transmission pipeline under the roads. They were unable to proceed in the Presidio because the EIS has not yet been approved for the project, and obviously in Marina because Marina is currently fighting over permits and things like that. There was a brief stay on construction in the unincorporated county, which was granted and then extended pending the outcome of the Coastal Commission action, which is currently scheduled for March. So that keeps any construction on the actual plant site from happening. I do want to highlight that the 2020 water year milestone is at risk, and that's this September 30th. And that's any one of these 4 items listed here. Drilling activity for one source well in addition to the test well, that's currently under Coastal Commission purview, and we've talked a little bit about the hiccup there. Items 2 and 3 are in the unincorporated county, so it's currently subject to the small stay. And then item 4 is, to do the math, I think you would have to include Marina and the Presidio, the lands on that transmission line to get to 25%. And so those are still held up due to the reasons I've cited before. And then finally, if a milestone is missed and if the state board were to enforce a reduction in the effective diversion limit, there is a built-up or accumulated carryover credit of almost 5,000 acre-feet, but they can only be used at 750 acre-feet per year as credit against diversions from the river. I can tell you that last year, the most recent water year, the adjusted diversions from the river were 7,188. And so if we were forced to take a 1,000 acre-foot hit for missing a milestone, the current limit is 8310, so we'd go to 7310. So we would actually still, if we behave the same as prior year, we would have sufficient water. However, the question that we raised when we examined this question before is the plumbing equipped to get the water from where it is available to where it needs to be used for demand? And that question remains slightly unanswered. Turning our attention to rainfall, again, we had a great December. We're through the end of December, we're at 10.23 inches, which is 151% of long-term average. So the October concerns have been allayed, but January's not been great so far. You can see on the next page that we've had about an inch in January. So the red line is cumulative through the water year. The blue bars are actual rain events on particular days. So we're at about 11.5 inches, which is slightly more than half of a normal water year. So there's still hope. And then on the unimpaired flow, sorry about that, that's just covered. Unimpaired flow, again, If it rains a lot, you get more flow. That's what December looks like. We're at about 205% of long-term average. It's just not cooperating. There we go. And then finally, questions about ASR. We're currently at about 418 acre-feet. The white gaps are shutdowns due to permit conditions. Recently just shut down because the Sleepy Hollow Weir flow rate went below 90 cubic feet per second. And so it's one of the permit conditions. If we get another sustained rainfall, then very likely we'll turn it all back on and prep and go. So we're in good shape on that.
Question?
Question, go ahead, Vice Chair.
So what is the end of our ASR season? Is it May?
End of May.
End of May.
Yep. And John's already promised me 80 to 90 more days.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Go ahead, Director Rowley.
You mentioned maybe there's an asterisk to your comments, but you said without adequate plumbing to use the carryover. That's the way I interpreted what you said. What are the plumbing deficiencies?
Turn your mic on there.
Sorry. What are the plumbing deficiencies in order to fully use the carryover if we need it?
Okay, so just focusing on carryover credit?
Yes,
Yeah.
only that.
So carryover credit means you can overpump the river's effective diversion limit by how much you've saved in prior years, up to the 750 acre feet. So it could be helpful, and there may not be a plumbing problem if you're actually taking that water from the river and pushing it into the Carmel Valley. Right now, there's a little hiccup in getting water from the Seaside Basin through the Monterey Pipeline and up into the valley. So then the question is, where's that front in demand between the Carmel Valley and the rest of the system? So if you have a good ASR year and a good pure water Monterey year with a lot of storage in the Seaside Basin, if you need that water to offset Carmel River pumping, then that's where the plumbing issues come. So the 750 from the river over what you might be normally allowed to pump can help alleviate that problem while you're waiting to push water up the hill with a new pump station.
But,
So I don't know, and it just depends on how much demand sits, how far down the valley.
Right, and without going to the demand side, just the ability to do it, it's based on a pump station to get water into the upper valley.
Yeah.
And it's based on what, the pumping capacity out of ASR, out of the Seaside Groundwater Basin?
Yeah.
Are they the two
Those are the
infrastructure
two
needs?
primary ones, yeah.
That's what, okay,
Yep.
that's what I
Yes,
was
sir.
trying. Thank you.
Any other questions? A question on ASR. How that $50 million pipeline doing? Are we at 100% of it?
Good evening, Directors, Chair. The pipeline has been being used as far as its capacity of about 6,000 gallons a minute. It has been operating around 1,500 gallons a minute, and we've been bringing about 15 to 2,000 gallons a minute over the hill from the crest tanks. So that's been being used in parallel to balance the system and balance the demand, because as we're learning how to use this pipeline, we're figuring out that a blend of about that flow rate of half or moving it around, we can kind of adjust which tanks fill and which tanks drain faster. So the bottleneck in the whole system is actually the capacity of the well field in the Carmel Valley. So moving forward, there should be efforts made to rehab, maybe find new wells and new sources in the Carmel Valley, so that we can use the transfer capacity that we have built. But right now, if you said is how much water has been moving through that pipeline this year, it'd be about 1,500 gallons a minute.
Thank you, sir. Any other board questions? Okay, Jim, is that it?
All set, yep.
Okay.
On that one.
On that one, and did we do an update on development of water supply?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Was there public comment on the last item?
Yeah, go ahead. I don't,
Thank you.
Is there time for public comment?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much. My name's John Tilley, resident in Pacific Grove. What was mentioned right there was milestone number 5 and the risk that is involved with milestone number 5, and how some of those are clearly, all of them are related to the construction of the desal plant. December 13th, a letter was received from the State Water Resources Control Board, and it was issued to applicants who are looking for some changes to the milestones. Some real quick readings from that letter. The State Water Resources Control Board will not accept the application for modification associated with development of the expanded pure water Monterey project between 2019 and 2021 as parallel, not substitute milestones, to the auditor's existing milestones for completion of CalAmp's proposed Monterey water supply project. The application will not be considered by the State Water Board based upon the current lack of clarity regarding the status and viability of any alternative water supply project that has been proposed to fully replace CalAmp's existing unauthorized diversions by the end of 2021. The existing cease and desist order remains fully in effect. This says that the idea of substituting the desal plant with the expansion of Pure Water Monterey does not release these cease and desist order milestones. Please keep that in mind as you consider the demand and supply report.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So in the past, we haven't been able to comment after the manager's report, and I think it's a great idea because I always have questions and I never get to ask them. So you might want to consider that. I want to go back to the ASR pipeline. So what I heard was the capacity is 6,000 when everything's really grooving. You're getting about 1,500 right now. Is that because that's how much you can legally draw from the river? Or is it because of this blip going up the hill? I'm really, last year I was so disappointed when the production of ASR water was below what it was 2 wet years before. Because, you were learning how to drive it. It was brand new. It's a year later. I know you don't get to drive it when it's not raining, so you have like 4 or 5 months where you don't get to play with ASR, or 7 months, whatever it is. But I didn't understand the answer about resolving the issue about, if you're going to end up with because of the Pure Water 1 Monterey water and ASR water, so then we have, most of the capacity is over in Seaside, and that we need to move it to Carmel or Pebble Beach, and we can't get it up the hill. And so I just want a little more, it's just a comment. I don't know if you want to answer, but I still don't quite understand what is keeping us from getting the water up the hill and getting our $50 million worth, at least on the ASR component. So that's my comment.
Thank you. Any other public comment on this item? Okay, public comment is closed on this item. General Manager, any?
Well, just on those two speakers, Mr. Tilley is correct about the letter that was issued by the state. We and Planning Conservation League, who made the application, and others view it as nothing less than a desire by the state board to release ex parte communication rules. So there was, with the application pending, there was no ability to talk to a board member or senior level staff, whether you're in favor of a desal plant, not in favor of a desal plant, or what have you. The ex parte rules kicked in, and I think they all recognized that and intentionally lifted it. What it didn't do is change footnote 17 to the cease and desist order, which says if there's any viable alternative water supply approved by the Public Utilities Commission, then the State Water Board can consider alternative milestones. And so it doesn't change their ability to establish new milestones should there be an alternative water supply. Okay. On the second speaker, there's really two separate issues. There's winter when you're injecting and how does the system work. And I think John adequately addressed that the constraints are well capacity, maximizing water over the hill using the, past the Segunda pipeline to the Crest tank and then down the hill, and around the horn, as you go around the horn, you have to be very conscious of the levels in the Forest Lake tank so that there's sufficient fire protection levels. And so as you're filling that tank and draining that tank, filling that tank and draining that tank to pull water to the north, you have to pay attention to what you're doing so you don't drain the tank, so to speak. So we are, and you could get more capacity if you maximize how much goes over the hill and how much goes around and pay attention to all three of these things. We're definitely not meeting our winter water rights maximum that we could move. And that's, I think we're still learning to drive the car a little bit, even though we're driving it better. Summertime is, and when you're extracting water from the Seaside Basin, is where the pushing the water up the Carmel Valley constraint comes in. And so they're kind of two different issues. And one's related to just meeting system demand in the summer with what water you have. If you have the water stored in the north and you need it in the south, we're just not quite there yet. And that's the issue.
Vice Chair?
So just in terms of the ASR capacity for this year, what is the guess on the maximum we'll be able to provide?
Yeah, so I mentioned the 80 to 90 days. So let's say that we're averaging, when we're pumping, we've gotten up, we started a little slow, but we got up to, on the average of, say, 10 acre feet a day. And so if we did another 80 acre feet, then it would be an average year. It'd be the 1,300 that we've, written into all the water resource planning and water supply planning. We're sitting here with February, March, April, and May out there, so that's about 120 days plus another week in January. So it all depends on the weather, but
Right.
So I think even if we have average rain the rest of the way, we should be able to double where we are today.
Double what we have right now, which
Yeah.
would put us in 800.
Yeah, it'd be eight to 900 easily.
So still short of the 13.
Right.
Right.
But we might make it to the 13.
Any other questions from the board? You update on development of water supply projects?
Sure. Let's start with Pure Water Monterey. That's just an aerial view. You guys have been out there enough and have turned earth and cut ribbons and everything. And
Drunk water.
I'm pleased to say that we did, and when I say we, collectively with Monterey One Water, did a 14-day test. We did what's called the challenge test with the UV system. We reported all of the water quality data to the Department of Drinking Water, Division of Drinking Water, by now. They have scheduled their final visit for February 4th. We've been apprised that we should receive permission to do first water February 7th. If that happens, it will be going straight to the Castroville Seawater Intrusion Project pond at the facility. Beginning Monday the 10th, we would begin to flush the pipeline and reservoirs system. We would start injecting to the Vado Zone wells on the 17th. And we are scheduling, part of the problem is you got to schedule your vendors to come out, and there's warranty issues and so forth. And we have vendors on the injection end who said, until you have water, we're not going to schedule you to come out. So there may be some difference between either the 17th or the 24th of February, but we will have first water on the likely the 7th, but no later than that following week. So, and we in the testing there were hundreds of gallons turned over to a certified lab, and those results have been put in the document, and so we're done with all of that. It's just a matter of getting permission to move forward, and the results are pretty good. This is the schedule. It's too hard to read, but what I just talked about is all of the activities at the end of the blue bars, and you can see barely in there 2.7, which is first water to groundwater replenishment. We, the district, are on the hook for the first 1,000 acre feet that goes into an operating reserve. So we will be injecting And yeah, there will probably be fits and starts. You know, it's not going to just run at maximum capacity from day one. So normally you could fill 1,000 acre feet in about 3 months at full capacity. Internally, we're kind of saying, let's give it 4 months. So that'll take us into midsummer for then delivery for customer service. On the expenditure side, this shows that through the end of the last fiscal year, we're at 98 million. The approved budget was 8.5 million. We're actually at, including change orders, closer to 11.5, 11.7. That all adds up to 110 million, and I should let you know that it's really a $126 million project. The difference is fully committed, but it's retainage and remainder on the contracts that have been let. So ultimately, it'll come in at about 125, 126 million. On the source side, I just wanted to remind you that we put 12.233 million in on the pre-construction side. From that point forward, and Monterey One Water also put 7.2 million in, inclusive of some of their investment that preceded our agreement with them to invest. So they had done a few million on their own in prior years. The rest then came from the state revolving fund and state grants, state and federal grants. And you can see the grants here. Not shown is a Bureau of Reclamation grant that finally came through an appropriations bill early December, mid-December. So it's in the hands of the Bureau of Reclamation. That's 4.1 million. So with that 4.1 million, our total grants on the project is $25.8 million of free money. And don't point out to me that we as taxpayers help fund all that. Yeah, free to whom? But that's a pretty good ratio of state loan. And recall that we got our state loan application in the last week before they closed the 1% interest rate program. So we're at 1%. So pretty darn good in terms of how we financed it. Turning our attention to Santa Margarita for storage and recovery. This is the chemical building that you approved. Maureen is not with us tonight, but she took some great photos. And it's the first day of construction, 12/9. We found an unknown object. Stopped everything because it was an odd smell. Could be old munitions. That's the worry when you're on the old Fort Ord property. Luckily, everybody was in town. The EPA, the Department of Toxic Substances Control, and the Department of Defense, they came out on the 10th and inspected and gave authorization to proceed on the 11th, and we determined it was an old palm tree that was rotting. But when it's across the pit, it looks like it could be a turret of a tank, or it could be anything. On the 20th, we began the excavation for the cellar and poured the footings. You can see here. Here's the forms going up the walls and the rebar getting set. The cellar walls were poured on January 3rd. The cellar floor, the way that gets done is you compact the earth, you cover it with crushed rock, put in a vapor barrier, and then a 6-inch slab got poured, and then the walls were all epoxy coated because these are primarily below grade. And then finally, the schedule, we expect to hand it over to CalAm for SCADA installation in July. We were able to mobilize 2 weeks early, and we were 2 weeks ahead on the building schedule, which means we're going to lose those 2 weeks because I just jinxed us by mentioning it. And then where we'll stand, we've got a huge stockpile from the excavation. We've got the building to finish, the underground piping, then the above-ground piping, and then the last will be the road completion. After SCADA, it's pretty much substantial completion by September.
Okay.
And then finally, turning into the desal plant, I already mentioned the Coastal Commission issue. And so until they take action, there's not much additional work that can take place. It's not really in Scotts Valley. It's the Scotts Valley Hilton, which the address is Santa Cruz. And the reclamation project, storage tank rehabilitation project, the award was issued September 30th. The notice to proceed was given a start date of November 12th. On November 1, we expended our $1 million of the $1.6 million budget. A bypass system was installed for use when the main tank is out of service. And then the construction's expected to be finished by the end of February, prior to the irrigation season for the golf courses and the Stevenson ball fields. And the $1.6 million budget appears firm, which means the 0.6 that they put into the current year is covered by the water sales. Next year, next fiscal year, we will get half of our investment back through the water sales. And then in the following fiscal year, the other half. And that's how we spread it out over 3 years rather than taking the hit. And then just a reminder what the reclamation project does for the community. The 24-year average is a savings of just under 1,000 acre-feet per year of potable water to irrigate turf. I only had data for the first 10 months, but it's on track for about 940 to 950 acre-feet for the last calendar year. So that was a great investment. We were on it in 1992, and it's been a real pleasure to see that kind of savings take place. And that concludes my update on water projects.
Any board questions?
It's me.
Go ahead there, Director Riley.
Sorry.
You're
Sorry.
on.
Two quick questions. One is on the CalAm financing for its desal. State revolving fund money, I understood, has been in the pipeline or to be decided. Was there ever a decision finalized on that for financing?
Yes, so they received a recommendation in the plan of use for full funding of the non-corporate equity component of the desal project. They still have to get the environmental work certified. They have to get, and that includes the federal EIS portion. They have to prove all their finances and that they can meet their debt covenants and that they would be on parity with their other debt covenants and those kinds of things. And that application process takes quite a while before they write the agreement, but they're working on it.
The EIS, wasn't that completed through the PUC?
But it's not been certified yet because the lead agency is the National Marine Sanctuary, and the waste discharge permit with the addition of the desal brine has not been approved yet by the regional board, and so the sanctuary won't certify until they see that NPDES permit amendment.
Understand. And then on that same point, wasn't the district in the position to help finance the reduced equity from CalAm, but with the state revolving fund money in the pipeline, or appear to be in the pipeline, does that mean we don't need to do any work in that direction?
Correct. We filed a response letter to an advice letter. When the advice letter was filed, I think it was an advice letter, whatever it was, we filed a formal letter to the Public Utilities Commission saying, we've been waiting on the sidelines to get started on this financing, but we're going to have to spend $250,000 or more up front to get it all queued up. It now looks like it may be unnecessary due to the state revolving fund monies. We don't really want to spend the $250,000 plus if we're not going to move forward with it. It appears likely that they will receive the state funding, so therefore we're standing down on doing any work. So that's where we stand right now. It could be restarted. The problem is the upfront work, which includes what we call a shadow rating. It's going to the rating agencies, and stress testing, which are financial scenarios based on different weather conditions and so forth. The investment bankers and bond counsel have a lot to do. We need a financing order from the commission, which would precede the financing. That's a 180-day process with a lot of legal work. It's an expensive proposition. I think we budgeted almost $1 million for that upfront work, and
But we're not going in that direction.
We're not going in that
until-
direction right now. That's what our letter to the commission said.
And then my last question is, has to do with the pump station that's been mentioned several times. The booster station, or the Forest Lake Station, pump station. That is being financed in the general rate case cycle. What's the general timeline for if there were approval of that?
Probably late 2020 to mid 21. That's been our experience generally. They filed in July of 19.
At the moment, we're not expecting a general rate case decision until November or December of this year. And so the implementation would occur at best, I believe, in early 2021.
Okay.
Question?
Go ahead, Vice Chair.
So these are the estimates for the Pure Water Monterey, or not the estimates, but the actual. What was the original estimate for Pure Water Monterey?
Yeah, so when we started it at 30% design, I think we had 83 million total. By the time it got out to bid, we knew that it was in the upper $90 million total. I would say some of the change orders and other contractor-related issues probably added a few million. But when the bids were finally received, it was clear that we were in a different economic climate with construction as well. But there's still some, I don't want to say much publicly that might affect a mediation or an arbitration, but there are still some costs that will probably be heatedly discussed after completion of the project.
Thank you.
Okay, any other board questions? Anybody from the public want to comment on this one? Update. Okay, no public comment, that's closed. Next item, attorney's report.
Thank you, Chair Edwards. The board did meet in closed session at 5 p.m. There are two items under discussion. Item 3 was public employee performance evaluation of the general manager. Item number 4 was public employee performance evaluation of our administrative services manager, chief financial officer. As to item 3, the general manager's evaluation, there was a motion by Director Byrne, second by Director Evans, passed unanimously to approve the evaluation format and template that's to be used to evaluate the general manager for the year 2019-2020. And I believe that format, that template is available, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, so it's available for those. But it's the template and the format and the process that was approved. With respect to the other item on the administrative services manager performance evaluation, general direction was provided, and there will be an action item at the next meeting to bring that back for consideration by the board. That concludes my report.
Okay. Next item, director's report, including AB 1, 2, 3, 4, reports on trips, conferences, attendance, and meetings. Anyone? Go ahead there, Director Rowley.
I attended the Special Districts Association meeting, and I can say it's interesting, but the people are more interesting than the subject matter. But nevertheless, I do attend.
Okay, any other comment?
Say no more.
I get it. Anyone else? Okay, next item, public hearings, general manager.
Item 13 has been waived as a result of item 3. And that brings us to item 14, and Stephanie Kister Campbell has a presentation.
Okay.
Good evening, members of the board. I'm Stephanie Kister Campbell. I'll wait for my PowerPoint to come up here. All right, so this is public hearing item 14. We're considering a request for variance from separate supply line requirement at a new single-family dwelling at 26425 Lower Ellis grade. And the applicant, Ryan McNichol, is here today, and he'll have an opportunity to speak. So Ryan is building a new house at the top of Laurellis Grade. And District Rule 23 requires that he install separate supply lines from the meter box to the house, one line for domestic and one for fire suppression. So the reason for this requirement is it allows us to facilitate enforcement of water rationing should we ever go into it. So someone can put a flow meter on the domestic line without interrupting the fire suppression. So we're here today to consider a variance to allow a single supply line to the house to serve both domestic and fire. So the reason for the request is the Caliam system at the meter site for his property does not have sufficient pressure to feed the fire suppression system. So it is sitting at 26 PSI and the fire suppression system needs 55 in order to function. So to meet fire code, they've agreed, Brian and the fire department, a system where a water storage tank and a pressure tank would be installed near the house. So that would boost up the pressure and get the right pressure they need for the fire system. Now, if they were to use that system and meet our requirements, they would have to in fact do 2 storage tanks and 2 pressure tanks. So added costs, which may be an undue hardship on Ryan. So for you guys to consider, the board allows variances or can consider variance when special circumstances exist. If there's practical difficulties or undue hardship that would result from a rule, and granting of variance should not tend to defeat the purposes of our rules and regulations. So staff is recommending the board approve the variance to Rule 23 to allow a single water supply line to serve the house on Laurellis Grade. And that is all. Thank you.
Is that it?
Mm-hmm.
Short and sweet?
Mm-hmm.
Board questions? Vice Chair?
So the explanation is a single line from the meter to the pressure tank, and at the pressure tank, there will be a split line so that the fire suppression doesn't get turned off when you turn off the, if you had to turn off the domestic line, correct?
Yeah, that's true, although...
And does the, is there an agreement that the water management has rights to go on the property to make that turn off?
No, so that would be the issue. Caliam would not have, be able to go onto the property. That's why the requirement is to have them in the meter box where Caliam has authority over those supply lines.
But can't that be an agreement with the property owner that they would allow access to the domestic line in the case of rationing?
Yeah, I believe that could be added as a condition of approval.
Okay.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Director Riley.
Along those same lines, it seemed like that's a critical part of this variance, was that a single tank, single line feeding a tank, single tank that would feed 2 lines. Each of the lines would have a separate meter, and the one meter could be controlled, just like was mentioned. Okay. And I would be interested in some condition similar to what's been mentioned.
Okay.
So my understanding, there was only 1 meter.
The new 1 Caliam meter, so we're not proposing, normally you would not meter the, they both come in through 1 meter, and then usually 1 line is a 0-use line, right? So the use is all on the domestic side. So it wouldn't affect the usage there at the main meter.
So
and
the
we're not
one
proposing
meter is
additional
required.
metering up above at the house.
Right, okay.
Any other questions? So fire suppression, if we're building a building out here, do you have a separate meter for the fire?
No.
Well,
I think so.
In some structures they are. So
Yes.
now you would build it, especially a commercial building, they
Yes.
would more than likely design it with a separate connection.
Separate meter and
That's
everything.
not the design in residential, because you have to pay for the larger meter. It's not a good design for a residence.
Okay, and I gotta ask, because you're getting all that water, you got a sprinkler system on there, right, for the house? Okay, that's good. Any other questions? We'll take public comment on this item. Is the applicant here?
Yes.
That's you. You want to say anything?
I think she pretty much got it all dialed in. I think that all sounds accurate, and the idea is to go from the meter to the.
Yeah, come on up.
Yeah,
Thank
so,
you.
because we're at the top of Lorelis grade, it's only got 35 PSI or less, and we need the 55 like in the presentation. But it's really just the meter that goes to the storage tank. The storage tank goes to a pump in order to get that 55 PSI. And then that runs to the fire sprinkler and to the domestic water supply for the building. So that's
Okay.
the design.
Okay, anyone else? Any question for the applicant or anything else?
Well, I just
Go
want
ahead, gentlemen.
I just want to point out that we did have disclosure of ex parte communication on the prior item, which was rendered moot. But before you make a motion and vote, you may want to just, if there's been any ex parte communication on this.
Anybody have anything to report?
Great.
Okay, public comment is closed. Do I have a motion?
Motion to, oh, second?
Okay, a motion by Director Adams and a second by the Vice Chair. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? 7-0. Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Next item,
What's that?
item number 15, General Manager.
Yes, this is merely a
They
presentation.
may have already had a meeting.
This was presented to the Water Demand Committee and added to the agenda by the chair to update the full board, waiting to bring it up. And there we go. So you may recall in September, the board was given a presentation on a water supply and demand forecast. Since that time, there's been a lot of discussion about it. Unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot of substantive help provided in terms of changes in assumptions or changes in facts or changes in the bases. But a couple of things did happen. One is another water year went past, which gave us another data point. Former Mayor Camp raised a couple of very interesting issues that warranted some additional investigation. One is, as the housing elements change, as the regional housing needs allocation through AMBAG, which will ultimately be revised, I think, this year, because I just heard from one city manager that they're starting to meet on this subject next week. But we still have, we wanted to check what the housing needs that we currently have under the current 10-year program might look like, what water demand is required to meet the housing elements. And the other issue he raised is, at least in Pacific Grove's case, the way they manage their water allocation, even pre-CDO, was it was a constrained environment. And he raised that issue in public comment in another forum. And we said, you know, there is a lot of discussion about there were graphs in the September report, and it said, hey, here's the absorption rate of demand based on the pre-CDO decade. Well, if you feel that we were constrained even in the prior decade to the CDO, then that may not be as indicative. We also showed 3 times that rate, and then we showed what happens with 250 acre feet immediately and then returning to that rate. And we had quite a bit of pushback over, hey, these are just assumptions. You don't know what's going to happen in the future. And it's true. The past is not always an indication of the future. We did ask folks, I see Mr. Tilley's here, and he can verify, on numerous occasions he said, well, if you got an alternate view of the future, give it to us and we'll put some numbers on it and figure out how much water that might need. So what we attempted to do was actually find an objective third-party forecast and simply say, okay, if that's our future, how much water will that require? So those were basically the 3 items: add the 2019 water year, examine needs for housing, and then look at an objective third-party forecast. So we did find that AMBAG had done a growth forecast for a 25-year period in 2018. We looked at their results for the 20-year period from 2020 to 2040. So it wasn't really a 25-year. They used a data point from prior to the forecast as a starting point. We looked at the 2020 to 2040 period. And we said, okay, let's just see what that does. And the key questions are, where are we today, where are we going, and how soon will we get there? And what that means is, where are we today is, what is current demand? What's baseline? What's our starting point on the chart, if you will? Where are we going is, what is future demand? And this is where we got into some back and forth in the September production of the report, because we drilled a little deeper, and we said, well, we don't think Pebble Beach really needs that much water in a reasonable time frame. We said this and we said that, and everyone, all opposing viewpoints also came out at that time. And then how soon will we get there is that it goes back to the rate of absorption. What is the slope of the curve year in and year out as you're adding new demand to the system? So this is the last 21 years of demand, and what was significant in adding that additional data point is the slight uptick in 2018 went back down in 2019. So use a term from math and statistics, it may be that we've gone relatively asymptotic, that maybe we are now in a predictable, relatively level place. Don't know for sure, could be wrong, but now we've got 5 years of data that all hover around the same place. The 5-year average and the 3-year average are 8 acre-feet apart. There's been disagreement over where are we today. The Public Utilities Commission said we were convinced that 12,350 acre-feet represents an appropriate estimate of annual demand. That was in their decision in September of 2018. The data that was used was presented in 2017 and only went as far as 2016. So there is a little bit of that was then, this is now. We've had 2017, 2018, and 2019 added to the data stream since then. And when you look at the 10-year, 5-year, and 3-year actuals, all of them are less than that starting point. And I actually have a problem every day I get out of bed and I go, well, I'm living in the present, so I can look back 1 year, and if I say 1 year's not enough, well, what about 3, what about 5, what about 10? But the 10-year number is almost 1,500 acre-feet below what the Public Utilities Commission has signed off on as our starting point. So it's very hard for a numbers guy like me to say, oh, our starting point is approximately, at the current AMBAG growth rate, which we'll talk about in a second, approximately 30 years worth of water demand. So there's a problem area in what is the current starting point. And then we talked about the general rate case. Even their own forecasted sales are much closer to the current numbers. Huge econometric model that they're using that they paid a lot of money for all of their different systems throughout the state. But in the Monterey system, the numbers they're using for the rate case are much more in line with the 5-year average and what we're seeing here locally. So what we did is we said, all right, get rid of those 3 lines. I mean, they're still in the report, the revised report that you have, the pre-CDO rate, 3 times the pre-CDO rate, and the 250 acre-feet. But let's just look at the AMBAG growth forecast. Let that be the proxy for where are we going. And so we looked at the 20-year divided by 20, so that's an annual rate. Of course, it'll be all over the page with peaks and valleys. And then we took that same annual rate and took it out 30 years. And what's shown here is both water supply projects are more than sufficient to meet the AMBAG growth forecast through that period. Then we said, what if we're off by 200 acre-feet? That may be too little, that may be too much, but just what if we should have started 200 acre-feet higher? And it moves your crossover on where you would run out of supply with Pure Water Monterey expansion, about 25 years, and of course desal would be more than enough. The interesting point here is that this ignores a couple of other things. It ignores additional supplies from the Sand City desal plant, from Table 13 water rights, and from Seaside groundwater basin carryover credits, and further ignores the 700 acre-feet of Seaside allocation that comes back to CalAm in the 25th year because they're doing an in-lieu recharge. Think of it as pump fallowing, if you will. They're not going to take their right for 700 acre-feet for 25 years to help replenish the basin. That comes back in the 25th year. And then we said, well, what if there's an expansion in tourism? i.e., in existing facilities, what if the capacity or the occupancy rate moved from the mid 70% to the mid 80%, about 85%. Very unlikely, very unsustainable. But we just said, what the heck? What if you had 10% more visitors in the hotels and restaurants that exist? And we said, what if you factor in 3 new 225-room hotels, one every 3 years, basically, in the first 10 years? And what if you assume the new visitors eat at least one meal outside of the hotel, and so the restaurant went up? And it could be anything. You could get a new company to come here with 100 jobs, whatever it is. But we use this as a proxy. And you can barely see it, but in the third year, there's a little uptick, and that's for a hotel coming online. The yellow line itself shifted up due to that 10% more. In the 6th year, you see another little bump in the line, and then in the 9th year, another little bump in the line as these hotels came on. And what this tells you is this kind of imagination situation does move that crossover of demand and available supply a few years forward, basically, again, to like the 2044, 45 timeline. Then we said, what if both happen? We're off by 200 to start, and then this tourism thing happens, and that moved it up to 2040. So basically, you're 20 years out, exhausting supply from Pure Water Monterey expansion, but you're still good with desal. And then we also asked the question, and this comes because somebody said to me earlier this week, well, every time AMBAG does a growth forecast, we never achieve it. I don't know if that's true, and I'm not picking on AMBAG, but I said, well, what if it's slower? And then obviously you've got more than enough supply from both projects, and you could easily ask, well, what if it's faster? And I think those were some of the scenarios we just looked at, which is it shifts your need for new capacity forward because you're growing faster. And so that is the summary of the revised report. The full revised report was included as an exhibit to this agenda item.
Okay, board. Go
and
ahead.
then I should add, today you received a letter and a study by a third-party consultant, Hazen and Sawyer, on both the original September report and some of the conclusions in the revised report. And then there was a letter that, I don't know, did it make it into the packet today from the defense? Okay, so there's a letter that you'll receive. I guess we'll send it around tomorrow.
I think we got.
Oh, you have copies.
We got
Okay.
a copy of that one
Great.
too.
So we've realized our dream that we do this and then people oppose it and then we answer it and then people oppose our answers and then we go quiet and then if we do it again, it starts back up again. We're getting exhausted by that. So I think as you read these letters, staff needs guidance as to whether you want an answer to any of the points raised or not. We do find that there are, and we pointed this out to the, I think you were CC'd on it, we found errors in both fact and errors in assumption in the Hazen and Sawyer report. But as you've noticed for 6 months, it's basically you say something, I'll say something, you say something, I'll say something. And so I don't know if we're coming to the end of the trail on this or not.
Okay, thank you, General Manager. Board, any questions for the General Manager, Vice Chair?
You made the statement, and I think that was maybe a correction. You said the conclusions in this report, and I don't think there were actual conclusions. It said the case could be made. It could be made one way, it could be made another.
Yeah, there were conclusions, though, that were just sufficiency of demand on page.
You know what?
Yeah.
I don't think it's worth getting in an argument over it. I think we have done this report.
Okay, Director Potter.
So, Dave, I'm just wondering what you've heard from the jurisdictions themselves, the cities, the county.
Great.
It seems to me they would be best at forecasting their own future.
Yeah, so we, second week of, it might have been the first week of January, sent the report to each city manager and asked them to specifically look at the appendices on the RENA, so the housing element, and the AMBAG growth forecast. And then in some email chatter, we've pretty much gotten promises from 4 of the 6 to get things back by the end of the month. I looked at, so Del Rego's just went through a report on trying to comply with their housing element. The numbers that we have from the prior RENA are the same. As far as the housing numbers go, we have reached the conclusion that whether they're going to be rewritten, and they'll probably go up. But because the growth forecast contains 2 elements, population and job creation, we've pretty much said the population element of a growth forecast includes the housing element of a RENA, because that's where the people are going to move, either new housing that's got to be built for their arrival or existing housing. So we've asked the cities to focus a little bit more on whether their view of job creation and population are in alignment or differ significantly from the 2018 AMBAG study, and we should hear by the end of the month.
So my observation as a mayor's rep is that the cities are pretty much the determinants of their future, whether it's growth or jobs. So I'd hope we'd take their input seriously.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Any other board questions? Just one from me. How often should we do this?
Well, it all depends on what the future of the district looks like. Every urban water provider has to do something like this every 5 years, urban water management plan. You need to test your water supply planning against an average year, a dry year, and a 5-year drought. Our belief is, I mean, we track it every year to see if something has changed. And so we're always looking. Occasionally, we come to you and we'll say, hey, something's up. In this past year, we looked to see what happened during the U.S. Open, because the expectation was it was going to be an increase in demand year, and nothing materialized. And so we, meaning the district, we tend to look at this every year. But from a water resource planning standpoint, you should go every 5 years. It's interesting because for maximum month demand planning, you look back 10 years. For sales forecasting, the Public Utilities Commission says use 5 years of new connections as an indicator of your future 5 years, except if there's a reason to vary from that assumption. Well, if you got a moratorium in place, you can't really predict new connections based on flat 0 new connections. So you just need to look at it whenever there's a new issue, or roughly every 5 years when you're doing your planning work.
Okay, thank you. This is a public comment period. Anybody like to comment on this discussion item?
The general manager spoke to the letter that the Monterey Defense Alliance sent to you this afternoon. I'd like to speak to that. I doubt that the engineers and architects or builders on this board would ever intentionally jeopardize your professional license or professional credibility by designing, building, or knowingly signing off on a project that you knew violated industry standards, state health and safety code, the state code of regulations. The general manager is recommending you do just that by asking you to approve a very questionable supply and demand report as the foundation for sizing our future water supply. Before you accept this recommendation on sizing, please obtain written commitments from the Water Resources Control Board that the moratorium will be lifted without a desal plant. He says it is in his report. Get that in writing from the board. Because of what I heard at the Coastal Commission meeting from the State Water Resources Control Board Executive Director, I have some doubts. And I'm doubtful because it doesn't meet standards that they will. Without such guarantees, our perennial water shortage that all of these estimates are based upon, because we've been in a water scarcity since 1977, so it's kind of hard to say what it would be like if we really had water. But for the military and for our community, critical infrastructure such as our water supply must be reliable, it must be resilient, it must be drought-proof, and it must be mission capable for today's missions and tomorrow's missions. It's got to have flexibility. The recommended system sizing does not provide that. There's actually no allocation for military-based mission growth, as the installations do not have lots of record. They're not subdivided. So there's no water for their future if they should need it. We know from past history, they sometimes need it on very short notice. Mr. Stoltz's recommended project sizing and supply does not provide an adequate portfolio of water resources to protect our military missions or our greater community's needs against drought, climate change, economic demands, or system failures. Critical infrastructure design and sizing based on best case hopes and that ignore history, industry standards, and state regulations would be an irresponsible act on the part of the board. The proposal assumes near best case supply and demand forecasts and then arrives at a point estimate for the various supply and demand factors. This is not an adequate programming approach for several reasons. It ignores the ADU requirements that the state has put in place that you got to approve. It underestimates the RENA. Our RENA was always adjusted lower because of the lack of water. It ignores our housing shortage that exists today. It underestimates the frequency and duration of drought. It ignores climate change, and it overestimates aquifer storage, seaside aquifer, and Carmel River rights production in the long term. And it also assumes a very complex project will work 100% of the time at 100% capability without failure. That's too optimistic to base our future on. Now, this afternoon, I got a question from Mr. Stowe that I think I need to answer. He says in my letter, you make the following statement. Mr. Stoltz's faulty analysis has led him to conclude that the desalination plant is not needed. Please cite exactly where you have heard or seen me state that I reached that conclusion. I wasn't sure whether that was a real question or not, but the answer to his question, number one, if he didn't come from a position that the desal plant is not needed, say that full-throated and your meetings would be a lot shorter. But where I got that conclusion was on page 16 of your report today. It says principal conclusions.
Sir, I'm not trying to cut you off, but your time is up.
Okay, either supply option can meet long-term needs of the Monterey Peninsula. That means you don't need a desal plant if you accept that conclusion.
Thank you for your time, sir. Anyone else here for public comment? Come on up. You might get a few more extra minutes now.
Oh, I don't know if I anything to say. Dan Turner, Monterey. Cal-Am and its supporters will never be happy with any sort of a study that shows water demand to be only 10,000 acre-feet per year, no matter how exhaustive the evidence is that supports that conclusion. Cal-Am and its supporters will always object to claims that we don't need 15,000 acre-feet per year, no matter, again, how exhaustive the evidence is that we don't need it and won't need it. Cal-Am and its supporters will always say that to say there's a need for only 10,000 acre-feet per year is questionable. The latest straw they've clutched at is that the military might suddenly need more water. We all support the military, don't we? What if they suddenly need another 5,000 acre-feet of water? What exactly are you going to do? The real reason the Cal-Am wants this desal plant is because it will make additional untold millions and millions of dollars if they can ram this down our throats. And the reason that the business community supports this goes back to the sweetheart deal that Cal-Am gave them in September 2013 when they took the businesses off their tiered rate system, which I believe was put into effect in 2008, 9, 10, something like that, as a result of one of these CDOs. And by taking them off, by saying, oh, as long as you businesses do best practices, put in low flush toilets, you get one low rate. You get one low rate. I think it's a little higher than the residential tier 2 rate. I'm not certain. no matter how many bazillion gallons of water you use. This has saved the big commercial water users around here a lot of money in the past 6-7 years. And remember, the way water bills are paid is on what do they call them? Having a senior moment, a zero-sum basis where every 3 years the PUC says to Cal-Am, you can collect this much money and apportion how you're going to get it from commercial and from residential. Well, the less that the commercial users pay, the more the residential users pay. That's why you hear from the business interests that, oh, this 10,000 acre feet is crazy. So you can go around and around and around on this forever, or you can just vote that you support the general manager's study, which is just wonderful. And I did that in under 3 minutes.
We'll save your time for the next time. Next, please.
Thank you. Hi, John Tilley, Coalition of Peninsula Businesses. Dave, thanks for this report. Thanks for all your hard work. Thanks for getting that 1% in particular. That was beautiful. Well done. I went to the AMBAG site to look at the RENA numbers, and what I found was a letter that was from the California State Department of Community Development and Housing. And they discussed the RENA numbers. They do not consider them growth forecasts. What they actually say here, and I quote from a letter that's on the AMBAG site, the RENA represents a minimum amount of residential development capacity for all jurisdictions they must plan to accommodate through zoning and appropriate development strategies. RENA is not to be used within local government plans as a maximum amount or a cap of residential development to plan for or approve. And when those numbers were done in 13 and prior years, that was in a different political climate, and we all know that today's political climate is much different. Housing has replaced water here locally as the #1 issue for people running for office, and statewide it's obvious that the housing demands are going to be going up. So that's just a quick thought on RENA. What was discussed here largely was demand. There was not much attention given to the supply side, and the tables that are in the demand and supply report talk about the ability of the expansion, in particular of Monterey 1 water, to meet the demand forecasts that were given. In recent days, the Monterey 1 Water Board has received 2 letters. One is from the Farm Bureau, and these are really an outcropping of the Salinas Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency work that occurred. And they, as we all know, have responsibilities to keep their water sustainable. Having the water come over here that is going to be used in Pure Water Monterey is water from Salinas to some large extent. The Farm Bureau speaks to that need to respect the GSA, and it says at the end of their letter, and again this was from the Farm Bureau to Monterey Water in early January. Last sentence reads, we request a deferment of any decision to approve the expansion of Pure Water Monterey until there is more data on overall water sustainability and use in the greater Salinas Valley groundwater basin. And don't be so sure that water is available. Also, the Salinas Valley Water Coalition, which if you're familiar with them, is a very influential group over there, people who really rely upon water for their living, also deeply involved in the GSA. A letter as well to Monterey 1 Water. And this, again, addresses the supply side of the expansion. This is a letter from January 17th. Their letter ends by saying, the Salinas Valley Water Coalition wants to be good neighbors and assist the peninsula in meeting their water needs. But this cannot be done at the degradation and needs of the Salinas Valley. Therefore, we believe that the expansion of Pure Water Monterey, as currently proposed, not move forward at this time. Thank you very much for all your good work.
Thank you. Next.
Kevin Dayton, representing Monterey Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. I finally got to see a copy of the letter from former Pacific Grove Mayor Bill Camp, and I said, finally somebody's speaking the same type of stuff that I am, because he focuses on population control. He notes, and if you probably read this, and I'll say this for anybody in the public and all of you who may not have read it, he notes from 1970 to 2018, California grew 99.2%, and the peninsula cities within the district grew 0.5%. He notes Capitola and Santa Cruz doubled in population during that time, and Half Moon Bay tripled. And it's interesting he said that because on Tuesday night, Half Moon Bay City Council discussed 71 housing units. A group called Peninsula for Everyone was there to support it. There were 55 speakers, and the opposing group was Resist Density. And guess what one of their talking points was? There isn't enough water. You always hear that wherever you go. He says, is this outcome regarding the population an achievement or a failure? Unfortunately, I think a lot of our public policy in the region is controlled by people who thinks the outcome is an achievement. He says this outcome is a persistent failure in leadership. Once again, I think there are plenty of people in the region who say this is a great triumph of leadership. California is getting too crowded, and this area has avoided it. But I'll note for you that this does have an impact. Monterey Peninsula Unified School District enrollment has been dropping and is continuing to drop. And some of you know, I know Mr. Edwards, you must know, there's a Vision 2025 Plus task force, and they're talking about closing schools. So as you go about this and you hear this thing about Cal-Am profits and all this stuff, keep in mind the force that you've got behind here is population contraction. And I believe that this is very bad for commerce, it's very bad for our society. Having an area where there's dropping number of children is not good. Some other comments regarding the report, Mr. Stolt. I suggest that Table 1, Monterey Peninsula available supply acre feet annually should have a minimum and maximum from each source. You do that on other charts, and I think having the, some people would say, well, some of these numbers, what happens if this or that happens? I think it would be good, it would help strengthen the report if you had a range of numbers for that. One question I had is, in the chart it talks about Carmel River water still, and I have to admit I wasn't able to find this. Apparently this Cal-Am can take water. I think that the general public believes that one day there'll be no water taken from the Carmel River, and maybe it could be explained at some point. Is there still water that can be taken, and what is the vulnerability of that water from those licenses being taken away in the future? Thank you.
Thank you. Next. Don't fight over it. Come on up.
Hi, Susan Schiavone, Seaside. I just wanted to address the Bill Camp issue a little bit.
Keep in order.
We have shifting populations, and we did close Fort Ord, which took a lot of our population out of here, and it's starting to come back now because we're developing in Marina, and Seaside is a lot of projects that we have on the board to develop housing and areas for people to live. Comparing the peninsula with Capitola and Santa Cruz is apples and oranges. They have a lot of Silicon Valley people coming down into Santa Cruz living and establishing those types of businesses there. They're moving this way. You look at the new little airplane Joby thing that they've got going on in Marina, that's going to bring Silicon Valley people down here. We have more and more people that are going to come here. I think these population numbers are very deceiving in that way. We're going to have a lot more people moving in. I think also when you designate an area as a tourist attraction and focus mainly building on hotels, upscale condos, restaurants, and entertainment venues, you're not focusing on housing for people. You also do not address and how to count the short-term rentals that are happening so much where they're not residents, they're just coming and going. So you have a lot of issues around this. It's not just water. It is a concerted effort by our community, and I think one of the problems is a lack of creativity in some of our cities. I understand that they did receive water credits at one point for low-income housing. Many of the cities didn't use them that way. So we need to make a commitment as several communities, a regional commitment toward having affordable housing for people to live here. And one of the reasons we're losing people is it's so expensive to live on the peninsula. Thank you.
Thank you.
Melody Crislock. Excuse me. I hope your board is going to consider adopting this revised supply and demand report on next month's agenda. Cal-Am is currently lobbying state agencies aggressively, the governor's office, all of them, in an attempt to influence the Coastal Commission in favor of their desal. And their main argument is that this report is wrong and the expansion is not enough water. State agencies are only hearing from Cal-Am. They're only hearing one side of this. It's vital that they hear from you. You need to get on board with this revised supply and demand report, stand behind it, and start educating the state agencies, like the State Water Resources Control Board. I was there a month ago, and Eric Ekdahl was combative about the Pure Water Monterey project, but only because first he said to me, well, we don't care how you get off, this is State Water Resources Control Board lawyers, we don't care how you get off the Carmel River, but you got 4,000 acre feet, you got to get off it. You got to stop that 4,000 acre feet. I said, well, wait, 3,500 of that is about to materialize. He looks at me and goes, well, maybe. So, I think there will be a big shift in the State Water Resources Control Board once that water starts being injected into the Seaside Basin. But we still have, evidently, Carmel Valley won't be able to get that water this summer if the pump stations aren't done yet. But I really would ask this board to get behind this water supply and demand report and start educating the agencies that Cal-Am is aggressively lobbying. Thank you.
Public comment still open?
Michael Bear. Thank you, David. I'm sure you spent a lot of hours on this. I always marvel at your ability to number crunch. Glad there's people like you honestly working on this because, and your ability to boil it down where I can understand it. So thank you for that. Second, I just want to say I've never heard that the military expansion was part of the plan for our future. So, how much water supply is the military going to suddenly need? Navy postgraduate school is not going to suddenly need a whole bunch more water, I wouldn't think. Or the Presidio. So the thing about this report, I'm interested in seeing it get to the agencies. The first one that's really important is the CPUC. I mean, the discrepancy. If they're saying 14,000 is what's needed, in terms of including growth, and you're showing growth of roughly 10,000 and even in worst case scenario, 11,000 over the next 30 years or so, they need to see that alternative. We get a chance to talk about it on February 18th, but you guys don't meet again until February 19th. So my understanding is that maybe you're going to approve this letter to go out to people. It'd be really nice to have that in hand in Seaside on February 18th. I don't plan to drive to Gonzales on the 19th. And it wouldn't work anyway. And then the Coastal Commission. They need this too. I mean, it seems to me the demand was the major thing that stopped a decision in November. And they're working hard to understand the demand, to respond to those concerns in time for March. So, the sooner they get this, the more time they have to integrate it into their calculations. Going back to the PUC, my understanding is, so if Cal-Am goes and say, yeah, this is our projection, 12,000 acre feet, for this year, and we only use 9, then that becomes RAM charges, right? That's good. That escalates our bill because it's an under collection. These numbers are critical. The RAM charges could go through the roof, and perhaps you could I know you know about them. So what impact does this discrepancy? How would that impact the RAM charges on our Cal-Am bills, if you could, say that at all? And finally, this report says for the next 20 or 30 years, 20 to 30 years down the road, based on those projections that I saw, we may be 1,000 feet short of what we can currently produce with the expansion. Maybe we'll be able to catch enough rain off roofs and put them in cisterns and have gray water systems to make that up in the next 20 to 30 years, or something else.
More communication still open?
My name is Mark Kelly. I live in Monterey. And I have just a couple items I'd like to discuss this evening. First of all, the fact that the report has been done is obviously healthy for conversation. There's never been a terrible shortage of that, but it seems to me that water supply in this peninsula, and not just within the District of Cal-Am and the water district itself, is important. But water supply to this entire peninsula is important. And at some point, we need to be better neighbors. The first thing I'd like to address is in the report that has been put together by the staff. It's pointed out that under new state laws, there is a 55-gallon, which will ultimately be reduced to 52.5. So I went back into the actual legislation itself and went to Chapter 9, Section 7, 106.09.4. And the reality is that the legislature put into place those numbers. But here's what's important. The department, in coordination with the board, shall conduct necessary studies and investigations and may jointly recommend to the legislature a standard for indoor residential use that is more appropriately reflects the best practices for indoor residential water use than the standard described in subdivision A, which is the 55 and 52.5 gallons. This report from all affected parties, and it lists who should be involved, needs to be presented back to the legislative committees by January 1st, 2021. So the 55 gallons and the 52.1 are benchmark numbers that are not reality. We'll see what reality is when everybody comes back to the legislature and it goes into effect, or doesn't go into effect, but at least the report comes back in January 1st, 2021. So as you're examining the report, please don't do it with the assumption that those two numbers are currently statutory. They're benchmarks and advisory, waiting for further input from other people, and then a decision sometime in 21 what the real numbers will be. Secondly, it does not speak to outdoor use at all. Not at all. This is indoor use only. So when you're adopting a report, if you discern to go forward, please remind yourselves that there's no standard for outdoor use yet at all, and won't be until next year. The last thing I'd like to address very briefly, but I think it's really important, because it's not in your district, but it's sure as heck in our community, and that's Castroville. Castroville has 7,250 customers. It is 100% severely disadvantaged. And what you have done by pursuing this report and potentially the expansion and ignoring the desal, or potentially ignoring it, is you're leaving those people in a really bad spot because their wells are going to be completely intruded. It's 7,250 customers, 1,984 connections. Those are real people and real businesses. And we need to think about this as a giant neighborhood and not as just the district and Cal-Am versus Castro versus the Salinas Valley. It needs to, we need to stop. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else?
Mark Eccles from Pacific Grove. Desalinization is an environmental abomination. And how can you give credence to a company who places a sensor in the wrong location and gives a false reading? And in the future, that desalinization plant will pump more and more fresh water that would be going to Castroville if it were available. And the problem with the Salinas Valley is they need to make that connection between the two reservoirs. That's of prime importance for all the residents in the valley. Think of it this way in this modern context, this little simile. Desal for water is somewhat like fracking for oil. Keep that in mind.
Thank you. Public comment is closed on this item. Mr. Laredo, you can go first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to remind the board and the public that this item is on your agenda as a discussion item only. Several members have mentioned adopting this report. You cannot do that tonight, even if you want to. This is a discussion item. Your agenda says, and I quote, "No action will be taken by the board." So this is for you to discuss. Any action would have to take place on a future board agenda.
Thank you. General Manager.
Well, I'd just like to say, primarily, we agree with everything the speakers have said, with a couple of exceptions. The statement about not complying with industry standards or health and safety code or the California Code of Regulations is completely false, and it's been made in a number of letters put forward. So we would never do any planning in violation of industry standards or state regulations. There was a little bit of mixing of policy here. We have actually been a champion of creating an allocation specifically for DOD, or conversely, one for the Army and one for the Navy here on the peninsula, specifically so they'll be in a stronger position to combat any base realignment and closure actions that could come down the line. We realize that having them plan their needs through their local jurisdiction is possibly not the best approach, but that whole effort will take place through the allocation process, that as soon as earth is turned on a water supply project that gets us there, we will begin that allocation process. And we clearly have the DOD folks in mind. The issues with respect to source water, it's really not our issue, it's Monterey One Water, but they've made multiple presentations, including to the Farm Bureau, that source waters for Pure Water Monterey expansion do not include any Salinas Valley waters that are accessible to the growers. And that's just a fallacy. And then finally, there was a reference to the gallons per capita per day. Just so you know, we did not assume any of those legislative mandates in the numbers. What you see is the last year and approximately last 3 years gallons per capita per day from actual data filed with the state for this service area applied against the population forecast. So we're not saying, oh, plus some additional legislatively created additions. And then the issue about being a good neighbor, I'm often troubled about that argument because we've got disadvantaged communities inside the service territory here. There are 14,187 population inside the DCAs, and that's 4,434 connections. That actually exceeds the number of participants in the low income ratepayer assistance program of California American. So what you have is, and that program is roughly 70% of tiers 1 through 4, so your discount is about 30%. So what you have in this situation, if we go forward with a desal plant, is our disadvantaged people subsidizing Castroville's disadvantaged people. So it's just something to keep in mind when this argument percolates to the surface.
Thank you. Any board questions? Vice Chair?
Well, it's not a question, it's a comment. This was a voluminous report, and we thank the general manager and the many hours of staff time that must have gone into this. But I think it's a snapshot in time, and we're done with it. And I think, as things unravel and move forward and et cetera, we'll have a new report down the road.
Okay, any other board comments? Go ahead.
If I could, I'd like to see this put on next month's agenda for action.
Director Adams.
They're very good.
Yeah, hey,
Very good. Thank
I've
you.
been saving it up.
Thank you. You've been thinking about it.
Oh, yeah, a lot.
So I just want to thank you very much for the report. It was really excellent, and I agree with my colleague that, enough's enough. But I just do want to make this comment, and it's something that a couple of other people from the audience have mentioned, and that's that this is terrific, but I think really sooner or later we're going to have to look at a regional solution to the problems that we have in Monterey County with water. And until we are looking at the entire county and maybe even beyond for a solution, we're not going to find one. And I agree with the comment that was made about, are we subsidizing people in Castroville versus the people in our district? It doesn't matter. People need water, people can't afford water. And until we all come together, until every person who is sitting in this room and at this dais has the same agenda of wanting to move forward with a plan for the entire county, we're not going to come to closure on it. Be that as it may, I think as far as what we can do from our side, I think this has been a very appropriate and helpful analysis.
Okay, Director Potter, you have any comments? I see you ready to go.
I'm out of here.
You out of here?
I'm out of here.
Okay, all right, Director. Okay, just closing all others, it will be on next month's agenda. We will make a decision on which way we will go. We are the leaders in this community on water, and this is one aspect of it. So it will come back next month, and we either gonna make a decision to, we're gonna make something come of it. So you expect to hear it again, and we expect to vote on it.
I'd hope that the city's comments are in there too.
Thank you, and I hope that you send them another email out, that we need it as soon as possible.
Yeah, they're all actually communicating, with reply all, so now that we've gotten 4 to commit to the end of the month, we'll probably have all 6.
Well, please let them know, we will take action next month. Thank you, this item is closed. Next item, GM.
Okay.
You might want to see this one, Dave.
I figured.
You might want to see this one, Director Potter. This is our future coming up.
So, is that coming up? Okay. I've been tasked with the unenviable task of working with a board that seems to be divided on some singular and unique issues. So I can't, when we had 6 or 7 like-minded people, it was easy for me to anticipate what you wanted on agendas, or come to 1 or 2 of you and say, you want it on the agenda. There are a few things that we've identified that, and this is not action, this is discussion, but we could use general guidance here as staff as to whether you want to agendize, and I call it the 4 nodding heads test in general. So I've laid them out here. One of them was just talked about, whether there's any desire to bring this back on the agenda. I think I just heard the chair say it's coming back. These are the types of things that I'm unwilling to make a decision on your behalf, that you really need to talk among yourselves. And there's also some, at the bottom, I've actually heard a couple other ideas from different directors. So I think we can have some decent conversation here. But you need to lead it and talk among yourselves. But the first being, do you want to bring this report back with some additional information from the jurisdictions, perhaps? What we discover in the comment letters that we have on this item in February? Does this board want to make any specific response or recommendation to the Coastal Commission?
Do you want to take these one at a time?
Yeah, it's up to you. I mean, you can read them, so we don't need to repeat them.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
Item 1, my nodding head.
Chair, if I may?
Yeah, yes.
On the first one, bringing the updated report back, I feel very strongly that we need to have the jurisdiction's comments included in that report before it is put forward for a vote on any action.
Mr. Chair, I'm hesitant to have you do this on a point-by-point basis until you've heard from the public.
Okay. All right, thank you,
And
Mr.
possibly
O'Reilly.
if we could hear from the
Keep us
public on the
straight.
entirety of the agenda item before you start going your point by point.
Okay.
Very well. I will.
Okay.
Well, if we're going to do the entirety, then let me just add a few comments as to why they're on here. Coastal Commission, we just talked about. Special allocation of water, you may have seen the Monterey, the news article that you should be expecting a request to find some water for housing. We've already talked about this a couple of times. We are convening the TAC. But in order to do this, that it'll be like those of you who are on the board when Chomp got a special allocation. You need findings. We got to cover CEQA. It's not just a slam dunk. You're moving away from our traditional allocation system that you have a new supply or a credit or something, and we can talk about that. And we're really just talking about until the CDO is lifted. And so it shouldn't be a big piece of water. We do need the jurisdictions involved in that discussion as well. Facilitated strategic planning. There's been a request, and I think it went through the group from the evaluation committee as well, that you'd like to see a facilitated session because of the pushback against any facilitated sessions that I was subject to for the first 7 years here, I want to make sure that everybody wants a facilitated session, or enough of a majority does. Update to district reserve policies. I think, we've already said that's coming, but I just want you to be aware of it because it's kind of special, and there's been different requests for different things. Budget workshop, we went through 6-7 years where the board said, just bring it to me during a regular meeting, and then we'll talk about it and then adopt it at the subsequent meeting. There's been a request from 1 or 2 board members to have a separate board workshop, so I just want to make sure if we're going to schedule one that you're generally directing us to do that. The review of Measure J, just want you to know that there was a specific request in the motion that work be done by June. All the consultants know that, which means we should be in a position by July for closed session because it relates to real property negotiation at that point. I just want you to understand the timing, less the subject matter. Sunset or suspension of the water supply charge, big discussion at our Ordinance 152 committee meeting on that topic. July is the 3rd year of collecting both. With the advent of Measure J, we've got some members of the Citizens Panel. Actually, the Citizens Panel seemed to have shifted in the majority within the last 7 months as to, can you use this money for Measure J costs, or can't you use this money for Measure J costs? But some sort of plan or options need to be brought to you for what you can do with sunsetting any or all of the water supply charge and or the user fee, and we're due. So that needs to happen this year. And then, do you want to vote on a resolution of necessity in September? And then a couple of the other question mark items, those of you who have them, you may just want to raise those. But so some of these are just a matter of, do you like the timing, not so much the subject. We have to deal with them.
And dates can change. You see September up there, until I see CEQA work come across us, and we vote on it and whatever, that's when I'm thinking the clock will start. Now, not until then. And now we're in the end of January, about to go into February. When I see that paperwork there, like I said, dates can change. So don't think they can change. So, any other comments before I take it out to the public?
Are we doing the board comments currently, Chair?
You can do it after or before public comment.
Just whatever you prefer.
Is this a public hearing, or is it discussion?
Just discussion.
Discussion
Discussion
items.
only.
No action will be taken.
No action will be taken, but can we see what the public?
Oh, absolutely. You go to the public.
Hey, I've been doing public all night, so I'm not going to stop on this one. So, any public comment, please stand. In 3 minutes.
Hi, John Tilley, Coalition Peninsula Businesses. I'll be less than 3 minutes. Coalition Peninsula Businesses is not a supporter of Cal-Am. If Cal-Am is ripping us off, let's find out. Let's take care of it. Let's make sure we're not getting ripped off. The coalition is involved only in making sure that we have a sustainable, secure water supply project built. I would urge you to do the same thing, to divorce any consideration of the water supply project from Measure J. It's a very dangerous slope to go down, path to go down, if you're combining the two, and if any decisions are made around a water supply project that involve the takeover of Cal-Am, it's a serious mistake that could have serious repercussions for many decades to come for this community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next.
Good evening, Rudy Fisher, Pacific Grove. Yeah, I took a look at the schedule here, I think yesterday afternoon, looking at the website. And I think it's very smart, and I think it's very smart of the general manager to put this in front of you for dates. You have some potentially very important decisions to make later on this year, and I think it's important to have these things and know when you're going to be discussing them. Now, one thing that I think may be missing, and I know in February you're going to talk about what to do with to send to the Coastal Commission, but the Coastal Commission is supposed to make a decision in March. I've talked to a couple of people who aren't so sure that they're going to, and if it doesn't, that changes things. So you may want to add something on there of what reaction, what changes a non-decision from the Coastal Commission may create, may cause for you guys. But I think it's important to have this on here and to try to stay on the schedule, because like I said, you've got some important things going on this year, especially with finance and budgets, and it's good to have it on there. Thanks.
Melody Krislock. I too am aware of the fact that the Coastal Commission may delay a decision on the desal plant beyond March due to the hydrologic report not being done, probably. But if that were to happen, or even if it doesn't, people are wondering, now that Cal-Am's desal is seriously delayed and will miss the CDO deadline, when will Pure Water Monterey expansion move forward? Cal-Am supporters argued that the expansion was only a backup plan if Cal-Am's desal was delayed. It's delayed. I hope those who are holding out hope for this desal project are not going to ask all the rest of us to wait forever for water. The expansion can lift the CDO. I don't believe that the State Water Resources Control Board is going to say, oh, that water's not any good, we have to have the desal water. That's slightly ridiculous. We all want water. What are we waiting for? The expansion can give us water. Please put a discussion of moving the expansion forward on February's agenda. I think it may become very important quickly. Thank you.
Hi. So the chair mentioned something about sequel paperwork, and I'm not exactly sure what that means. Is that the hydrogeology report that's delayed, or some other paperwork that I'm not aware of that this body's waiting for?
For Measure J.
Okay, okay. And then I just want to go back. Even this is a backup plan. You know, that staff report from the Coastal Commission said that in 25 years, the pumps are going to be under sand dunes. It said that Cal-Am has found 1 acre out of 51 acres that needs to be mitigated for ESHA. That's 6 years ago. They knew about that when the CEQA process started in 2013. And they managed 1 acre, and I suspect it's on the CEMEX site. I don't know where that acre is. And there are a host of other issues, including the fact that they said the modeling that took thousands of pages is incomplete, needs more work, right? This thing is going to be, I mean, we don't know what the Coastal Commission is going to do, but I can't imagine they're going to turn aside all their objections that they made in November. It could go on for a very long time, regardless of what happens in March. So you need to be pushing forward with the idea that we got to have a backup plan that is ready to go. All the T's crossed as much as we can do. So the moment it's clear that the Cal-Am's desal is dead in the water, we're moving. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Public comment is open on this.
I'll be really brief. Mr. Chairman, I heard you loud and clear about the report, demand report for next month. I would only hope that all of you could at least give a moment's thought to the fact, depending on what the city managers come back with, there may need be some real give and take occur between staff, the city managers, what the report looks like, demand estimates, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think we'd want to put that into a position of cramming that communication, because ultimately the city managers are the people on this peninsula who will need to be accountable to their elected officials for how this all moves forward. So I just hope you guys, ladies and gentlemen, give a little bit of thought to whether it's mandatory you get it back in a month, or do we really need to understand the managers and if necessary, give and take on what they're thinking. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Dan Turner, Monterey. We just heard someone say that the business community here isn't on Cal-Am's side. They're just concerned about having a water supply, good, reliable water supply. Well, if you believe that, I'm from New York. Before I left, I bought the Brooklyn Bridge, and I'll sell it to you. You just put up a toll booth, and you make a lot of money, Yeah, so if you believe what you just heard about the business community not really caring about retaining Cal-Am. I'll sell a bridge to you. The Coastal Commission is under enormous pressure from the PUC and the State Water Resources Control Board and others in Sacramento to approve Cal-Am slant well permits. The way things work politically is that corporations like Cal-Am pay a lot of money in our legalized system of political bribery that we call campaign contributions. And they expect to get what they want. This is why, as soon as the Coastal Commission's staff said, we're going to recommend to the commissioners that they do not approve Cal-Am slant wells, all hell broke loose. On the one hand, I may have said this before, as cynical as I am about the political process, it's hard to believe that the Coastal Commission is going to approve Cal-Am slant wells because there is so much evidence showing that it's a really bad idea to have this Cal-Am desal plant. But on the other hand, there is an enormous amount of political pressure being put on the commissioners, probably on the staff members also. Staff members to write a new report saying, well, we didn't know about all this stuff, and now that we know about it, yeah, maybe we should have. It's not great, Cal-Am's desal plant. Or on the commissioners to just say, to hell with the staff report. Approve that. They've done that before. And finally, our beleaguered general manager is doing more, than anyone has a right to expect to treat everyone on this fractured board fairly and with consideration. I think that's extraordinarily unusual, and it's wonderful. We're very lucky, and you're very lucky, that we have a general manager like this.
Thank you.
Wow, that's so nice.
Thank you. Public comment is closed on this item. Board members.
Thank you, Chair.
Director Evans.
As I was intending to say, and thank you to everybody else for saying it for me, is that I do feel that before at least the report comes back to the board, it should have the jurisdiction's input in and reviewed and discussed and taken into consideration. So thank you for saying that the dates are flexible on this list, because I would want to wait until all of that is in and we have a complete report to review. So that is what I wanted to say on that. Otherwise, these are topics that we should be discussing, and I'm glad to see them out there.
All right, next, Director Potter.
So this is a non-action item tonight.
Right.
It's for discussion only. So I'm very comfortable with the way we've always done it. Chair and vice chair set the agenda. I don't have a problem with that. I mean, that's the way it's been in the past. We've never had to go to opinion poll on what should be on the agenda. So I'd stay in that format and leave it up to the chair and the vice chair.
Okay.
If it's ripe for discussion, I think you'd be well aware of the fact that the public wants these items heard.
Anyone else? Director Altman.
Yeah, I had one addition that George and I, when we had the administrative committee meeting, and that dealt with the investment policy needing to be, we adopted it under consent today, but there's some investment options that are in that need to be revisited that we thought. And so as an addition to this list, we believe that it would be a prudent thing to take a look at the investment policy. In addition, I would suggest on the timing of these things, and maybe I'm not disagreeing with the list here, and I agree with Director Potter that the chair and the vice chair in setting the agendas for particular meetings, but just my sense of it is that the district reserve policy and the initial budget workshop should be moved earlier in the calendar year and not be a one-off before having to consider adoption of a budget the following month. I think it would be better to have that occur as early as possible, to have the budget workshop and also reviewing the district reserve policy earlier in the year. Thank you.
Okay, we can work on that. Go ahead, Director Rowley.
On the list, I would like to see some of the combinations, maybe the reserve policy and the budget workshop, and even the investment policy could be rolled together in a single workshop. I don't know how much time we need for all of those, but to express some issues may not take several hours. It may take several people commenting, but anyway, I'd like to see that. I have a couple items that I would like Dave to consider, and maybe if the committees are going to meet between now and the next board meeting, even maybe some of the committees could take up at least some aspect of the question. Question I have is the return water agreement, which does direct its attention to Castroville. My understanding of that agreement is that any excess water beyond Castro needs goes to agriculture. And in both cases, it's a heavily subsidized allocation to both of them. And ag doesn't have money problems. Castroville may have. But I would just like to have a little bit of a review on what are the cost implications of the return water agreement. That's that point. The other point I want to make is that the CDO seldom gets mentioned anymore. The milestones get mentioned. But the CDO is what is the angry kind of cap on things that could happen in this community, even with some marginal aspects around water use and water allocations. My concern is that both projects, whether it's pure water expansion or whether it's desal, are going to miss the milestones, miss the deadlines. That means that we're willing to continue to live with the CDO restrictions on things. My concern is that the district has been more interested in trying to find ways around the CDO in order to make some things work, not everything, but some things work. And Cal-Am is the one that's standing in the way of any little stretch of applying the regulations. So if anything, the CDO and Cal-Am's interpretation of CDO is a real restriction on all the business and all the housing and all the other things that people talk about. And I would like us to find a way, if we could, how can we fast track whatever decisions we could push or promote that would quickly eliminate CDO. And I think that's the issue that hangs over everybody. We talk about milestones, we talk about missing, and we just seem like, well, yeah, we've been missing them before, and we go. And people have quoted this evening about the State Water Board and what they said, get off the river and no shift in milestones. Well, we're going to be facing the fallout from that if we don't get rid of it. And I think there are some supply options in getting off the river that we are not focusing on. Anyway, I'd just like to elevate the CDO, the elimination of CDO, as a subject of discussion and see what the tracks are.
Oh.
Thank you.
Well, I would go along with that, and also, we need to know the resolution for the water rights from the reservoir that are up this year. I mean, I think some of these subjects are more important than rehashing the supply and demand report, because we've got a clear picture on that already, other than what the jurisdictions have to chime in, which is important. But that report, to me, is way less important than what George has just mentioned, and what we have a substantial water rights that's going to go away this year if we don't get that resolved. And I would rather see the time go for those kinds of issues.
Director Adams.
Quick clarification, it won't automatically go away, but it could, and we absolutely owe you, the whole board, it's in our one-year goals. We're convening meetings on that now, so hopefully we'll be in a position. We're going to have to spend some money, which will come at you in the mid-year budget review, but that's a very good point. And we kind of separated these in the normal course of business versus unique and possibly controversial, but you're absolutely right.
Okay, Director Adams.
I really support the comments about moving forward with the CDO kind of conversations. I think that's really important. I also think it's important to just lump some of those things that are logical together, so that we don't have every month really dried up, because there could be other things that come up that we're going to need to deal with just right off the bat. And then finally, I would just urge the chair and the vice chair to set priorities on the items that have come forward as discussion items based on the timing, knowing that we're not going to be able to get the jurisdiction's information by February, right, but could we get it by March, sort of thing. So I think that should be ceded to the two of you for your expert opinions.
Thank you. Thank you. And just one comment on this, and we can close this up. the 2 February dates, those are important. They are important just to get it out of the way. And we finally get our say on what we want to do. Things change after 8 years. So this board needs to decide where we want to go. You know, the party of 13 or whatever, that was then. This is a new board, got 4 new board members on it. So these things are going to be brought up, and we have a discussion, whichever way it goes, and it's reported out to the community on how we act. I want to thank you for your time, and any information items or staff reports, anybody want to comment? Okay, made 9 o'clock. Have a good night.
Thank you for 9 o'clock.
I think Dave's point is